No gray van. And he didn't call you on the phone either, did he? He didn't call you the first time. And he didn't call you the second. I did that. You mortify me in front of my father? And those pictures you got? I took those. And the missing guy, he's my second cousin. We sent him up to Atlantic City with a roll of quarters. And you know why I can tell you all this? Because, you lying motherfucker, you're as full of shit as I am. And you gotta live with it and play it out for as long as it goes, right? Trapped in the same lie.
When you walk through the garden, gotta watch your back. Well, I beg your pardon. Walk the straight and narrow track. If you walk
Alex Cottrell and Toby Huntingford present Caught on the Wire. This podcast is an episode-by-episode analysis of HBO's widely acclaimed TV series about the city of Baltimore, its people, and its many problems. Find more information about the show and all the episodes online at caughtonthewire.wordpress.com. Hello and welcome to the very last analysis of The Wire. We're here with season 5, episode 10, 30, and it is sort of the last formal episode, if you like, of Caught on the Wire. I suppose we'll leave a lot of our messages sort of looking back on having made this great expedition towards all 60 episodes of the show. I'll probably leave that until the end. But before we get there, Toby, can you really believe that we're here? Can you really believe it really is the last one? Here we are.
This project that we set out to do, it's practically achieved. We just got to get through these last however many hours we're going to spend with Dash 30 Dash. And sadly it's going to be complete. So, wow.
Yeah, I think wow pretty much sums it up for the time being.
That's what you need, yeah.
I suppose we might as well wait until said task is accomplished before we revel in it.
Yeah. Let's keep our composure and stick to the analysis.
Yeah, let's kickstart with our listeners' corner, and I will admit that we are recording this episode slightly earlier than we would normally, just to ensure that we can get the finale in on time, so we don't have to wait another week or anything like that. So you guys don't have to wait another week. So if we do miss anybody's email, and you did want to contact us for this one, then we are considering doing a sort of bonus episode with any mail that we miss. Maybe just as a sort of general reflection on the show, or if we wanted to comment on any other bits. But we definitely want to get any extra emails out if we do receive a few in the time that we would normally get them in, where in fact we're recording pretty soon after the release of the previous episode. So don't worry if you still want to send in an email and get it heard, because we'll probably do a short bonus episode for any kind of interactions like that. Maybe it'll just be a sort of listener's corner episode. We'll see.
Yeah, hopefully there'll be enough there for us to sort of make a bonus out of that. So, yeah.
Nonetheless, we did still receive a couple of messages in a few days already, which is great. We first heard from Matt Lambert, who got in touch to say, I keep meaning to email in, but I'm always 4 to 7 days behind the podcast, so most of my comments are a bit far behind the show, but the time to mail in is limited, and I feel that I should get in touch before your podcast ends. A couple of episodes ago, you said something about the editorial deadline at the Baltimore Sun. You said something along the lines of them, as well as Scott, manufacturing the news by having an editorial deadline of the afternoon before publication. I think, as a layman, this was old-school journalism from back in the day when stories were investigated and built. Gus says something about journalism not just being about who, where and when, but also about the why. But with even more pedantism when watching the Blu-ray of a recent episode, I noticed a continuity error. I say recent in the sense of your podcast. You can see in this clip where he links to Omar passing Kennard as those kids torture that cat before he walks up to the stash house, the Stanford stash house, in episode 8. It says that Omar starts off with a side-by-side double-barreled shotgun, but finishes the scene toting a pump-action shotgun. I don't remember ever seeing a continuity error like this in the show. As I said, it is pedantic. Yeah, I mean, it is quite a picky one there, but I think that's one you wouldn't normally expect
Omar's
Wire
got
to
a
get wrong.
whole shotgun collection in his duster coat, right? So we can assume
Yeah.
it's all part of the continuity.
Matt says, I'll be sad to see/hear the show end. I've been listening since April, which is a beginning of a DIY project coinciding with me discovering your show, and every week look forward to a new episode. I do feel a little bit let down when you don't manage to publish on the Friday, but I do understand that you have lives outside the podcast. I always have a few podcasts on the go, but yours is a favourite of mine. Any true Wirester would surely agree. Thanks for the show. Best regards, Matt with the Omar Cat. Well, thanks very much for your message, Matt. Let's take a look at a couple of bits they brought up there then. So, yeah, this sort of an old-school journalism approach in the Baltimore Sun from before, where we're talking about them, sort of having the news.
Instant gratification news, within the afternoon before sort of thing. Whereas...
yeah, there's almost like and a lot of preparing news beforehand as well.
Yeah.
That was kind of like the key part of it, I think, is a lot of this idea of, what do you have for tomorrow, as if they just kind of come up with the stories beforehand.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. It's like this week, actually, they made reference to it, where there's some random reporter who wanted to put forward a report about a salmonella outbreak, and it was instantly shot down, saying, they happen, they're a dime a dozen, they happen all the time, why do we have to put this forward now? And I guess it's just the conflict between those two sort of short-term stories and longer-term actually sort of discovering something new stories, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but it's certainly a great point.
And then we had a little bit of a continuity error. And again, this does feel a little bit too blatant in a way, because they're clearly two very different props. I feel that's a mistake they wouldn't make at this stage. So maybe there's meant to be a little something in it. Maybe there's meant to be a sort of an intentional continuity mistake, especially concerning Omar, when the facts are always distorted. Those little details are usually elevated to some extent. It's I guess that's when the kids see them and they see that he has some kind of, maybe they see him as kind of like the myth. So he has the stereotypical weapon, and yet when he steps out onto the street where the guys they start off maybe trying to face him down until they run away. Once he gets onto the quote-unquote real street and sort of beyond just the myth, we see that the real weapon that he's carrying, maybe, I don't know if that's an intent to greaten the myth of Omar and the weapon that we expect him to be carrying. I don't know, or maybe it is a genuine continuity error, but it seems like a surprising one if it is.
Yeah, it's weird. I mean, obviously Omar is characterized by his shotgun in many ways, but I never actually take time to look at the beast itself. Yeah, I mean, perhaps it's all happening in Scott Templeton's mind, and obviously details get hazy with that guy. So that's my only plausible explanation, which in itself is pretty implausible. So it's certainly a good spot. It's nice that we have some very eagle-eyed viewers keeping us on our toes there.
Yes, it's good to hear. I think we had a couple of people saying that they contacted us, listening to us whilst they're doing like work at home. Seems like a popular means of passing the time. So, yeah, thanks very much for getting in contact, Matt, and glad you've enjoyed the show. Now that we've reached the very end.
Yeah, cheers, Matt. I think we also heard from John Nyberg.
That's right, yeah. I don't think we've heard from John once before. I think this is his first time. If I'm wrong about that, then I can only apologise. But John says, hi guys, thanks for an entertaining podcast. It's nice to hear your analysis of the show after recently finishing my second time watching through all the seasons. My question is regarding Marlo's future as a businessman. When he has to stay off the streets, do you think he has potential to acclimatise to that world in a better way than Stringer Bell, who got used by Clay, giving away money to the Fawcett, etc.? Cheers, from John.
Yeah.
So posing a question there that I'm very tempted to I got half tempted to say a lot of stuff that I would be saying a little bit later on in the episode.
Yeah.
I also don't want to forget John's email, so maybe we could cover this briefly here.
Yeah, I mean, I think we should. I've got a nice. I mean, each element of the ending, I've got kind of a point of discussion. So I think we will be able to tackling this in depth. But this certainly is one of the most intriguing end points for a character in the show. Very interesting where Marlo might go from here. I mean, the short answer for me, I think, is no. I don't think he's got any potential in this industry whatsoever. Even less than Stringer Bell had. But I'm sure we can get to discussing that properly later on, and the reasons why.
Yeah, I feel the same way. It's pretty clear here that he's totally uncomfortable in those kind of situations. And then it's only because Levy is pushing him into this scenario in order to make him perhaps feel better about the situation that he's been put in and the demands that have been made of him. But I can't see any kind of long-term enjoyment being taken out of it, even just on the money side. I mean, it was never really about accruing massive amounts of money. That was just a means to help him build the power and recognition that he was truly looking for.
Yeah. And then at the end, he even discovers that power and recognition doesn't really have any longevity to it. So it's pretty crushing for him. And yeah, I mean, the business world, there's power in it if you can reach sort of Andy Krojek heights, and you know you've got a lot of influence. But it's not that raw, completely sort of run by fear power that he has been used to for so long. And yeah, it's just a bit of a fish out of water, and it's a very, very different ball game. So I'm sure we can get to that a little bit later.
But yeah, thanks for that. Thanks, John. And we also got a last email from Damon, who has stayed with us pretty much for the whole show, nearly, it feels like. Yeah. So it's great to hear from him on the final episode as well. Feels very appropriate. And Damon says, thanks again for the podcast and my favourite show. I wanted to bid you farewell and cheers as you hit the finale. With McNulty at the end, are we to gather that he just quits the job altogether or is unemployed or did not wind up working the boat or anything like that? I know they said he didn't work long enough for a pension, and I figured this but just wanted to get full confirmation. Regarding Kima, I grew quite the disdain for her after she ratted out McNulty and Freeman. Her saying it had to be done at the end to them at the bar was so self-righteous and smug. She grew a bit overly moral to me when she did that. She showed no loyalty to them, yet they were quick to forgive her. Also, I know they didn't have much time in Season 5, but another qualm I had with it was that the newspaper's characters were all a bit too one-dimensional for me. They were either good or bad. There was not much depth to them. What are your thoughts? Also, how satisfying was it when Slim killed Cheese? First time around watching it, I remember cheering. My wife's favourite part of the finale is when Bubbles finally gets to go upstairs and eat with his sister at the table. Lastly, many fans, I believe, overanalyzed Marlo's final scene. I think that meant that he was going back into the game or something else. I just think it meant the game will always be in him, and he hated this new life and just had to go outside for a taste of it, nothing more, nothing less. As a side note, as suggestions for future episodes, how about a few mini-episodes here and there, perhaps 15 to 20-minute long character appreciation episodes? A short episode talking about one particular character with quotes, favourite scenes, least favourite actions. Just a suggestion because I'd hate for it to end completely. I have trouble finding people in daily life with as much passion for this show as you gents and other fans of the podcast. Some friends of mine have fun with me because I randomly quote lines that aren't even technically so quotable. Anyway, I shall sign off and thank you guys again for the great podcast. Sorry for being probably your nerdiest fan who writes in too much. Take care. Well, there's no such thing as writing in too much. Certainly not.
It's been a pleasure, Damon. Absolutely.
Yeah, lots and lots of stuff to take a quick look at there then. So, first about the, where McNulty is going along after this. Again, a brief thought on it from you, Toby?
Yeah, so less ambiguous than Marlo's. I think the show is pointing us towards a positive ending for McNulty, and as far as his domestic situation goes, there is some stuff hanging over his professional career, and again, they're not completely out of the woods in terms of that secret about the serial killer being unearthed. Again, it almost feels like we should just sort of save this for the real moment in the discussion, but that's kind of my, I guess, preview opinion on the whole McNulty finish. So,
Yeah, I think given that the way that he acts in the closing stages of the show, particularly once that information is out in the air and everyone is kind of treating him, more or less knowing his place within the whole serial killer thing, I feel like he very much comes to a realization of what he actually wants. And it's unlikely to be involving the police much, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is
by choice or otherwise.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, even if he wanted to, he's got no chance of going back into proper investigative policing, which is possibly the best thing that's ever happened to him. And we can perhaps, in our best minds, assume he's going to stay as a season 4 McNulty for a long time without all of those added pressures. So, yeah. But I like that it's not so clear cut that you sort of have to come to that conclusion that there is obviously going to be a lot of mending going on after the stress he's put BD through in season 5, and yeah, it's not completely clear cut.
Kima Gregg saying it had to be done. Damon reckons that she, or certainly to him, came across as self-righteous and smug in that instance. What do you think?
Yeah, it's given a little bit of short shrift, the follow-up to Kima ratting out. I think my biggest problem with it is the lack of discussion. It's just Freeman, particularly Freeman, just sort of saying, you know what, girl, you messed up our careers, and like, well, it's tricky. It's very complex. Perhaps they believe that they themselves messed it up, but Kima is obviously very important in getting it to where it is now. Freeman sort of just instantly just says, you know what, let's make up, be friends. I think McNulty's response is a little bit more ambiguous, which I like. He sort of saves face and says, you know what, let's not have any hard feelings. But he does instantly wander off. He leaves the bar straight after, wanders back towards Beatty, we assume. So I like to think that McNulty perhaps is a bit more conflicted over what Greggs did. It certainly does leave a bit of a sour taste in the mouth, Greggs' finish. I like the fact that she could be considered over-moral. That's yet another grey area. Normally it's sort of being somewhere in between immoral and moral that's the problem, but the fact that she's sort of being too principled for her own good is certainly a good point to discuss, and it's very hard to answer that question correctly.
And then we were looking at... Damon thought that a lot of the newspaper characters were a little too one-dimensional for him. I can certainly see why that would be the case. There was 2 kind of very clear camps that were built within the newspaper, but I think the same was also true initially, or certainly you could see that initially of, say, Homicide, for example, and say opinions towards stat games and the like. There was a kind of us versus them attitude towards, bosses and those who had to do the will of the bosses. So at first it could be seen as cut up into a good and bad kind of way, and I think that's just an unfortunate part of the newspaper being stuck within one season and not really getting any development, and all of its characters having to do all of their sort of show's worth of arcs within 10 episodes. So I think it's unfortunate that they do come across as a bit less fleshed out than the rest of the characters that we're dealing with. It's just going to be that way because the fact they're in the last season and it is a shorter season as well. I feel like they were characters with quite a lot of potential, but there are still there are definitely quite a few people who pop up that we just don't get to see enough, or just aren't fleshed out enough for us to really know to any great extent. And I also feel like someone like Scott, who is, obviously a character of a lot of conflict, and his motivations, his sort of internal motivations, are intriguing as to just why he's so desperate to be recognised in so many ways. What is it that he has been lacking all his life that has forced him to need this so badly? But I don't know. It's a bit too easily explainable in the circumstances.
Yeah.
And he himself is not really endeared to us in any other way, which makes him a little bit more easily placed within some kind of camp.
Yeah, I mean, he's the most problematic character. He's shown as the most just an obsessive fabricator for no apparent reason. It's almost becoming a sort of mental issue for him. It just doesn't.
It definitely comes across as like, you know, a real mental problem of just not being able to tell the truth in almost any instance.
Yeah, it's very bizarre. Yet the rest of him is very composed, and I mean, he's not the best liar in the world, but you know, he certainly knows what he wants, and he's ambitious, and I think the newspaper might have benefited as well from a little bit more of the perspective of the bosses, Klebanow and Whiting. If we saw a bit more of the struggles they have with their higher ups, and if they perhaps were not so focused on the detrimental effects of the new journalist style, you know, the fact that this is the way to keep the business going, this is how we're going to keep getting paid, this is where the money is now. If both those arguments were put on a little bit more of an equal footing, perhaps it would increase that complexity.
We just don't see enough of their own difficulties. They just show up to make these executive decisions every now and again, and like you say, they are just totally stuck with this new attitude that they need to take towards the paper. And any kind of decision, no matter how reasonable it is, no matter what pragmatism is involved, it's just kind of like, no, we need to stay on the course that we have selected and not stray from it even in the slightest. Yeah. And you're there thinking, I'm sure there's a reason that they feel that way, but I just don't really know what it is. Yeah. Other than sort of personal interest or conviction.
On an extreme level, I mean, it's exactly what McNulty does. He wants to keep policing as it should be, and that's why he goes and invents the serial killer. Except that obviously that side of the story is far more complex as to whether that's morally correct.
And we also understand all of the things that he's done throughout the show in much the same vein, but just weren't this extreme.
Yeah.
So we can kind of see the evolution of that, that thought process as well.
Definitely, yeah.
Whereas we are introduced to it in this season, and then it ends. You know, it is kind of that, really.
Yeah.
We are to assume it goes on into the future.
Didn't stop that. I think the Alma Gus final scene was pretty touching, actually. But I mean, doesn't stop the storyline from having been a bit short shrifted.
Yeah, the season 5 newspaper characters are, unfortunately a bit limited, and we definitely don't get the same kind of. I mean, I don't know. It's difficult because I still feel like we did still get a lot of strong characters in season 2.
Oh yeah, they spent so much time with the Dockers. It was. I
think it's just tough because, like you say, there's a lot of emphasis on the Docks in season 2, whereas in season 5 the newspaper is juggling with so much else.
Yeah.
That maybe, although obviously it would have changed things completely, perhaps the focus of season 5 really should have just stayed with the newspaper rather than making it so much of a definitively finale season with everyone's invited kind of thing. But then again, you miss out on the overarching effects that the serial killer and the like has on all these different institutions, and we can make a lot of interesting comparisons. And so again, maybe that really is the aim of the season, much like the aim of the newspaper. It's trying to give us an emotional overview rather than going for all the detail. Yeah.
And I think on that season 2 point as well, if season 2 had done the Docks like season 5 does the newspaper, we would have been stuck in Sobotka's office the whole time. It would have been completely professional based. It's because we get so much domestic background and so much of the struggle. It changes everything, and our relationship and stakes in those characters are completely different.
And that is one thing quite unusually for characters, especially a whole ensemble of characters, is that we get nothing of that from the newspaper.
Yeah.
I mean, there's like 1 or 2 scenes, so.
Definitely, yeah. That was the biggest missing piece. I completely would agree, yeah. All right.
So I think one-dimensional as a way of describing it is perhaps a little unfair, but I definitely understand that there's just not enough depth to them, as Damon says. Like it's lacking by the nature of the way that it's been done, and that is unfortunate.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like every time the newspaper scenes came on, I was never bored. It's not like it's another newspaper scene. It's not like they're of a lesser caliber than the other ones. I guess it's that attention to detail that's present, and the fact that you can tell that the person behind it has really experienced this newsroom really helps to make them enjoyable. But it's just when you kind of get outside and try and analyze what's going on there, there is less to talk about, definitely. Yeah.
And then we had a bit about Marlo's final scene. Obviously, he goes out onto the street and tries to prove that he's still got it in him. Damon thinking that this may have been overanalyzed by some and that he was going back into the game. But Damon was just saying that he saw it about the fact that the game was always going to be in him and that he hated this new life that he was being pushed into and he just needed a taste of it one last time.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I think obviously Levy showed him the ropes here, and he realised that there was so much he'd have to do to really develop money and power in this industry. I think a big part of it as well is, as we spoke about last week, Marlo doesn't indulge in surplus emotion, if that makes sense. He doesn't put in any more than he needs to get something done. And in the world of business, you need to develop serious charisma. I could not imagine, Marlo being introduced warmly to any of these business guys. It's just not what he does, and he wouldn't be interested in learning that. I don't think. I think that's a big part of it as well. He just wants that primal fear, to grip someone, just to keep things simple.
Yeah. Regarding your suggestions about further mini episodes, Damon, you were talking about sort of character appreciation episodes, or perhaps going into depth about particular characters. And it's an interesting suggestion for sure. We'll have to have a think about it, given how many characters there are in The Wire. It might be a little tricky to select who we're gonna, who we would actually consider doing an episode about. So we'll have to have a think about that one. But as we said earlier, we're definitely going to be doing an extra one if we find ourselves with a few extra in the mailbag that we didn't get a chance to read out. So we will at the very least do that, just so that nobody is left out. Or we want to be able to discuss anybody's points if they got them. So if you send them in within a reasonable amount of time after this episode, then you can expect a little bonus where we do go over them. Don't think that we will just stop and forget about you.
No, definitely, yeah.
Thus brings our last listener's corner within an episode, with an episode being analysed specifically, as it were, to a close. And thanks very much to the three of you that got in touch in that time. Damon, John, and Matt, thanks again for joining us. So let's move on to the recap, if you're ready.
Yeah, let's do it. I'm very excited. It's my final moment.
He's got the fire and the fury.
This week we're going to be, everything is getting so connected that I have managed to sort of categorize things into their various strands, but it's kind of arbitrary. There's a lot of crossover. We're also not going to go through things strand by strand. We're just going to stick to the chronology mostly and dip in and out of each strand as we go. So we're going to go through 4 homicide sections, 3 politics, 3 courthouse sections. Rhonda's arc at the courthouse is substantial enough this episode to really warrant its own little strand. 2 Stanfield sections, 2 sections of the Baltimore Sun, a couple of sections with Bubbles, 1 with Dookie, and then we'll get to the final montage at the end, which will have a lot to say about that, I'm sure, because it's very, very dense. Okay, if you're ready, I'm going to kick off with our first section, which is a politics section. Okay, so the episode begins with Tommy Carcetti learning from the BPD brass that the Red Ribbon Killer was a fabrication, a revelation which renders him and his staff speechless. After some discussion, Carcetti and his advisors agree that revealing this information to the public would have disastrous effects on his upcoming bid for governor, due to the fact that Carcetti himself only recently restructured the department. In spite of protests from Perlman and Daniels, it's agreed that the case should be wrapped up quietly and those responsible will be reassigned and kept out of the way in return for silence. Chief of Staff Steintorf sees Acting Commissioner Rawls' leverage opportunity and offers him a position as Superintendent of the Maryland State Police, a position that better suits Rawls racially. This is following Carcetti's nomination for governor in return for his cooperation. So, that's our opening point, and very much like last week, it's sort of the dialogue takes the back seat, certainly for the first part. There's almost a minute before we get a coherent sentence being formed It's the disbelief of Carcetti.
That's right. We arrive right at the moment of the beans having been spilled, and yeah, Carcetti is just, he has this wordless opening where every now and again he might try and make half a sentence to start off, but it's just everything having to sink in at once, and all this effort that's been made to make a big noise about what a big protecting mayor he's been and what an even better governor he's going to be, or trying to sort of send that message to the people. He's been leaning on it far too much because now the fabrication has been revealed, and I think it opens up immediately the question about, right, so given all that we know about Carcetti and all that we also still, some of us maybe still hope is true, how will he react to this?
Yep, and very much inevitably takes the cautious approach. I think the show perhaps glosses over a bit what a big thing it would have been for Daniels to then take this higher up in the same way that Greg's did, because Greg's obviously went through a lot of struggles last week, and obviously we see the whole Daniels side after he's after the fact. We assume he'd have to go to Rules first, and then it would be Rules' call as to whether to go to Carcetti with it, but clearly they decide to reveal the whole secret. I guess just in case something does happen down the line, they need to have covered themselves. Interesting to consider whether Burrell would have done this in his position. Perhaps he'd have seen so much flack that he may have decided to keep it under wraps. So it's interesting to wonder how they got to that point.
Obviously made a mutual decision to bring that information to him.
Yeah. I think
certainly
Daniels certainly would have
opened up a bit of a can of worms there.
Oh yeah, definitely. I feel like Daniels would have been the one to really press it, and Rules would have been certainly very hesitant about it.
He would have seen, I think he would have seen the sense in it, because as we go on to find out with his leverage, he clearly intended to make enough of a meal out of it so that he could gain, whilst Daniels was purely doing it because he wanted it to be revealed. He wanted to ensure that the right course of action could be taken.
Yeah.
But of course, that ends up being manipulated out of his hands somewhat.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. I mean, as Daniel says, the cops that did this, they got to go. You cannot tell me that I have to live with this. So it's that. I quite like the Stringer-esque vocab that they got to go. Just building those links between the institutions as you dump your dead wood, as it were. But it's like he literally can't take the idea that the institution is faking it. It's masquerading as a police department. He wants to live for that honesty that he strides for. You know, it's something that actually is worth working for rather than just for the money.
Yeah, I think Wilson says it all, and he says that everybody's getting what they need through some make-believe.
Yeah.
It's just pointing out that everyone's found an opportunity to get something that they want, and rather than checking the actual truthfulness of any of this, they've just gone straight for the advantage that's in it for themselves. And I actually think that Wilson is a little pleased that Carcetti's leaning on this big story that's come back to haunt him, because now he only seems to turn up to make a humorous remark every now and again, and doesn't seem to be called on for any serious political or policy advice at all anymore. Yeah,
I mean, we always saw that Steintorf was the bulldozer and Norman was always generally more cautious and more principled with his politics, and perhaps it's gotten to the point where he feels like he's more of a spare part and that Steintorf is really the one to be involved here. But I like the fact that he's an ex-journalist, and we know that our journalists like to comment on a lot of the political theatre, as we saw Zorzi doing last week. And again, Norman is perhaps being a little bit too forward with his commentary here, telling us exactly what's going on here.
Yeah, and then we end up with Rules getting taken outside with Steintorf, who, of course, is able to make this work, is able to give Rules what he wants. They've obviously planned some kind of position that they can give to him further down the line. I get the feeling that this is a conversation that he's already had with Carcetti, and Carcetti has already agreed to, of course. And so they've anticipated what Rules is doing here, and this is the conversation that they've recognised they're going to have. And Rules is probably aware of that as well, so I think everybody just knows exactly what's going on and are going through the motions now at this point, because the vast majority of those with that information, with the exception of Daniels at this stage, is just thinking, well, obviously we can't just tell people. Obviously we have to... You just have to make this a nice, smooth recovery, and if we need to get rid of people, then we're going to do it as quietly as possible.
Yeah, definitely, yeah. Really good, as you say, moment with Steintor from Rules as they sort of profit from that leverage position he's got there, and very much shrewd of Rules to see that and go straight for it. The road to Damascus moment again as Norman's commentary continues. And yeah, I like the whole back channel is the way to go. It's a very pointed submission. Okay, I'm in your camp now.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's very cool.
Right as he walks in, there isn't like a sort of... There's no attempt to really fake it out with some kind of thinking session. It's just a kind of, yes, I was diddled in the hallway, and now we may continue.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, it's just him saying, I know that we're all, smarmy politicians here, let's just not hide anything. So yeah, like Burrell, Rules is because the system's so broken, he's obviously able to raise some flags on his way out if he wants, and they have to keep things cushy to prevent that. So yeah, it's quite interesting to see, and I like how Norman points out that the only possible way that an institution can legitimately profit from this is the journalism industry. Except the problem is that they're already complicit in this whole thing, so it wouldn't make any sense. But they're the only guys that could actually kind of, honourably profit from this, whereas everyone else is just using it as some sort of masquerade.
It's funny that Wilson said that he would love to be writing about it.
Yeah.
Because if he was still at the Sun, he wouldn't be doing any of that.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, he'd probably be long gone. He'd be in the Gus camp, Dinosaurs camp.
Yeah. Either that, or he'd have to bow down under the ultimate forward thinking of Mr. Scott Templeton.
Yeah, perhaps he'd have been
apparently
converted.
Seems to know something that nobody else does.
Yeah, and it's worth mentioning as well, of course, classic Carcetti at this point. The response, once he's formulated a response, that is the governor's going to have my arse. You guys will fall on your swords. So it's, again, there's no consideration of what this means in the wider context. It's just, here is my ascent to governorship, and here is the obstacle. Yeah, so it's very much the Royce approach, I guess. And we're also going to include the bit where Rhonda and Daniels have a little chat outside the city hall. And I think Rhonda, who was very much in Daniels' camp while they were having that chat, she was all for the principles and for the honesty of the situation. She starts mulling this over in her head, and all of a sudden she's actually switching her allegiance. She's always occupied this middle ground as far as like being noble versus being a careerist in the show. She's always been a very well-balanced character in that perspective. For example, when she wanted to refuse the subpoenas for for potential damage towards her, that sort of thing. But she's now thinking it through and realizing that the system, with the way it is, it'll actually do more damage to her if it stays private. So interesting how her perspective changes quite quickly.
Yeah, Daniels is very principled about cleaning house here. And you're right, I think Perlman is able to swing him back to acting a little bit more moderately once that she's given a little bit of thought to the impact on her career. So, yeah, she is always there to, like, for example, when we saw her with McNulty way back where he was perhaps being a little bit too forward with Levy. I think she realises the importance of a little bit of diplomacy and tact here and there. And in this particular situation, I think it makes it clear to Daniels that having this kind of principled stance isn't necessarily a good thing, because he's going to hurt the people that he cares about as well. And I just go back to the second episode where Freeman is telling Sydney about how everyone is complicit, and it's certainly very true that even those that don't realise that they're involved, someone like Daniels, who considers himself to now be clean and all of that kind of behaviour to be very much behind him, and him to not really be interested in the whole favours for favours system that we saw between Steindorf and Rules, for example, because he would prefer himself to get those kind of advantages legitimately, like when he has an engagement with Carcetti originally, of course, and he's told that he's able to advance into that position, and he believes it because he considers Carcetti's intentions to be honourable.
Yeah.
But it's kind of in this moment that he realised that he is actually involved as well through Perlman, and so he must also involve himself or risk hurting those that he cares about.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no one is avoiding getting muddy here. So it's it's quite incredible how tightly plotted it is to actually plausibly end up with everyone sort of with blood on their hands. It's very impressive. Okay, anything more on that first politics section?
I don't think so, no. Ready to move on?
Okay, so we're going to go to our courthouse strand, first of 3 sections here. So, though Daniels and Perlman have been informed of the falsified serial killings, McNulty and Freeman continue to operate under the assumption that their plot has remained a secret. With the Stanfields behind bars, Freeman takes it upon himself to identify the drug kingpin's mole within the courthouse. It's revealed that grand jury prosecutor Gary DePasquale has a major gambling problem with annual losses 3 times larger than his salary, and that he took out a 3rd mortgage on his home. DePasquale admits to leaking courthouse documents to drug defense attorneys, as Freeman points out that through the course of asset investigations, DePasquale was the only bogey in the courthouse. Freeman then tells DePasquale to resign quietly to avoid criminal prosecution, but not before recording a telephone conversation with attorney Morris Levy, whom DePasquale admits has been paying him for the court documents. Freeman meets with Perlman at the courthouse, where he provides her the identity of the mole and his recorded conversation with Morris Levy. Perlman, despite being happy to have such strong evidence against Levy, is still angry enough to reveal her and Daniels' knowledge of Freeman and McNulty's duplicity.
Okay, so we get this courthouse leak very late in the day. We do find out who it is right at the very end. It's actually been pretty key to characters getting hold of a whole load of information. They seem to be able to get hold of it, and we finally find out the reason for that. I think it's quite an intriguing reason when we meet this DePasquale character. I think we've seen a couple of times before.
Yeah, he's had a few lines here and there. I think I did. Of
course, he was working as part of the Clay Davis investigation case.
That's right. Yep, and he was also involved in the port case. He told the detectives that he could get all of them to swear that the docks were close to the water. I think that was his joke
right,
line.
That's it, yeah.
So I keep referring to him as D'Addario, which is completely wrong. It's actually DePasquale. So apologies.
D'Addario is the guy that plays him.
That's right. Yeah. Is he some sort of ex-homicide Baltimore guy again? I think he may well be.
I think he was one of the supervisors in Homicide when David Simon was writing, or he was some kind of lieutenant or something like that in the Homicide when David Simon was writing his Homicide novel.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, that's fair enough. I mean, as we say, it's late in the day. I think the fact that Prop Joe has been profiting from so much of this stuff going on, and we've seen his courthouse leaks, it does make it a little bit more. Doesn't just sort of come out of nowhere, you know what I mean? It's kind of a payoff in some ways, so it's still good to have it. And yeah, Lester just straight in there on case. DePasquale very much just sitting there and accepting his fate, with Lester having run those background checks. So yeah, very, very smooth operation from Lester. He is just sort of flawless at the moment, it seems.
Yeah, he's done very, very well, and he does even better to get that recording of the phone conversation with Levy. Manages to put DePasquale in the position where he knows that there's nothing that he can do, and thus he's quite willing to have this recorded phone conversation, and that in turn prompts a look of much surprise from Levy when he hears the recording of it, courtesy of Perlman much later on. Yeah,
and interesting to think that obviously this started out as the Clay Davis investigation. He has now has got 2 of his superiors to turn on the one above them to actually really expand the scope of the case. And that's in direct contrast to what happens on the street, where you can never roll people up. Obviously here there's not quite enough of a network of fear established that if you push people hard enough as Freeman does here, you can get both Clay and Di Pasquale to roll up to those above them. So interesting to see that.
And this always was what Freeman wanted to do. He wanted to be following that money and finding out exactly where the major players were. He knew he was going to have to start by looking at people on the street and working his way up to important people in the drug game and then the kingpins. But the people with with the real power and the real influence over more than just street corners are those in the important governmental and private buildings, and those are the people that he really wants to be investigating. So I guess it's pretty crushing for him come the end that he's not going to be doing any more investigating, and any further pulling of threads that he could have done after Di Pasquale is not going to be happening. Yeah,
definitely. So it's a very good case to go out on, but ultimately the actual the results of the case are pretty poor from Freeman's perspective, as we'll see when Perlman gets involved. But yeah, it's nice that he kind of reaches his maximum peak at this point. He finally gets to follow that money very closely.
It's a big victory at last here, at least.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, they're throwing a lot of victories and tragedies in one go here. And then of course we have that chat with Perlman. And again, it's very similar to that chat that Freeman had with Daniels last week. It's sort of this initial anger followed by unstoppable happiness and excitement for what Freeman's actually discovered here. She's astounding Perlman at what his courthouse investigation has already uncovered. And it's a mixed message for her. She's excited at the case potential and scared of the implications for her here, and also very angry at Freeman for keeping such a massive bottle on this lie. She clearly can't resist it when she has to sort of sarcastically reveal that she knows all about Freeman.
Yeah, they've already been figured out before this, so I think Freeman perhaps taken down a slight peg there, but nonetheless, the value of his work is there, and Perlman is going to end up using it against Levy. That's for sure.
Definitely, yeah. I think it's like at least we know the truth now, says Freeman, and then of course that's a great jumping off point for Perlman to question the truth. Yeah, very biting.
Yeah, he definitely gets a little bit of a push.
Okay. Anything more on that courthouse section?
Only that I wish we'd seen a little bit more of it. I guess it's a little bit teasing that it starts in season 3 that we learn more about the politics in all of these places like the courthouse and the mayor's office, for example. These areas become much more familiar to us, and we do start to see the truly upper echelons of the workings of the city and who owes favours to who. But it feels like there's a lot of characters like Di Pasquale out there in that courthouse and various other shady figures that we may have spent more time with if there had been a 6th season. So it's I always really liked these scenes, and I always liked the investigations that Freeman did. I always was slightly sad that they did get sidelined quite a bit right up until Clay Davis. It was only once they started getting on Clay Davis that we got to see a proper, full investigation going on. Otherwise, they were just a bit of an extension of the detail.
Yeah, he was out into the whole upper echelons, as you say. In some ways, it's kind of nice that they are sort of quite peripheral, because it means that when we do get a little sneak peek, we only can get a sense of how far-reaching their corruption may go. And even, as you say, there's probably loads of Di Pasquales around in that realm of the city, and it's very scary to even comprehend what might be going on. We're just scratching the surface, I guess, having a more of a focus on the actual streets itself.
Yeah, it does hint at a much larger corrupt world than can be seen.
Okay. Should we go and do our first Stanfield organisation section?
Okay.
All right, so drug kingpin Marlo and his lieutenants remain imprisoned. He discusses the case in depth with Levy. Having been informed of Snoop's death, the group agree that Michael was indeed an informant and decide that eliminating him is a top priority, although Chris appears to remain sceptical. Cheese is the only member of the group able to post bail. Monk has violated parole, Chris has been charged with murder, and Marlo himself has refused bail on the basis of his status as an alleged kingpin. and ability to intimidate witnesses and jurors. Marlo instructs Cheese to assemble the Stanfield crew's remaining muscle to hunt down Michael.
So given just how much the episode is trying to ram into its 93-minute runtime or so, I do feel like we push past the news about Snoop very quickly. It's not really spoken about. I know that they are not very sentimental as the Stanfords. I kind of see why we can't expect to see much of a emotional outpouring for Snoop, but it does. Something about it is slightly jarring that it's just never really spoken about. It's just a mild comment about the fact that we recognise that they know that it's happened, but that's it. That's all we get. So it's interesting that there isn't a little bit more of a mention of that, but I can also see why, given how much we do have to get through. And Levy's still exactly trying to ascertain what's gone on with this investigation to corner them all so much, and I think the idea of the illegal wiretap, courtesy of Herc, giving them a pretty solid lead. I think he's going to be cracking that open pretty soundly. I think pretty quickly, and if it weren't for Perlman bringing him that Di Pasquale phone call, I think he could have used it to very dangerous effect once they'd figured it out.
Oh yeah, that it would have spelled, obviously, I mean, Stanfield's back on the street and in the game still, and then you'd also compromise Freeman and McNulty heavily, potentially Sidner. So it's very, very lucky that Di Pasquale link was there. Levy's chat with Marlo, as you were saying, it sort of does get very close to Herc's neck at one point when Marlo says, no one else even had my cell number. And we get a nice pause for thought. There's a lie in here somewhere. And you do have to wonder whether perhaps Levy is considering Herc's possible duplicity here. A leak from his own organisation, because that might be the only explanation at this point. So I do like that ambiguity, whether Levy does ever consider that, particularly because he left that number very sort of just lying around very obviously on his little post-it pad thing. Although, I mean, he's a very shrewd man. If the mistake came from his own shop, he can hide this fact anyway, and they have a stronger case against the illegal wiretap. So the fact that it was Herc that perhaps made this blunder, he can just sort of brush that under the carpet without the need to worry about it getting out. So
not only that, but if he was really concerned, those concerns seem to evaporate pretty quickly because he's very happy with Herc later on, of course, and I don't think it's likely that that's ever to be brought up, even if he was thinking about it.
Yeah, and I mean, thinking really long term about it, if Herc had never stolen that number, they'd have never given the police an excuse to put out the illegal wiretap, and therefore have this case to build against them. Obviously, it's a big risk to run, because if the police did actually have money at the time, the wiretap would have been legit, and it would have screwed them over, but they just got lucky with that one.
Yeah, they did luck out a little bit on that one, so it ends up not being all bad news for Levy, courtesy of Herc.
Yeah, definitely. And just seeing Levy go over it so efficiently and quickly, really understanding exactly what's going on, it's just very, very nice to watch. That expertise, much like Freeman on the other side of the law, those two really go together like peas in a pod. I think they could easily switch roles and be equally efficient at each other's jobs.
And we get an order being put out here from Marlo aimed at Michael that we never see being put into action. And I think it's something that maybe we do forget about a little bit as the episode comes to a close. But presumably, even though we see Michael being successful in his first Omar-esque raid, you could say, there is now, people seriously hunting him down. So this is quite a scary call being made by Marlo here to just hunt down this kid who has potentially wronged him. That you just can't be sure of it. It's just following their principles from inside prison still.
Yeah, I mean, Michael's lucky that they have a big change of hands on the co-op front, which really occupies their time. They need to get in there quickly before someone else fills the power vacuum. But we assume that after that, Michael will become the top priority, and he's already occupying that Omar role. So hopefully he's well equipped to be on the run and maintain that Omar way of doing things.
Yeah.
And I like the fact that Chris does stick up for Michael. Perhaps he did Snoop because he knew we were onto him, rather than the fact that he snitched to anyone. So, which is exactly true. So Chris obviously having that little bit of a bond for Michael.
I think he knows what he would have done if he were in his situation.
Yeah, definitely. It's not quite a Spiros and Nick Savotka sort of bonding, but it's they've got something there between them, which is nice. Yeah, so massive head start for Michael, and as you say, a very big glossing over of Snoop. I guess that's in keeping with the way Snoop sort of prefaced her death with, "Deserve's got nothing to do with this. This is a natural part of the game. My time has come. No need to spare an emotion for me. Just work out the next step," sort of thing. Like that's what Snoop would have wanted, I think.
Okay.
All right. Okay, so next section is Dookie. You just got the one section for Dookie. Very, very tragic section. So, Dookie, having been left on the streets by Michael, returns to Edward Tillman Middle School to visit his old teacher, Prez. Dookie asks Prez for money, claiming that if he had enough for an apartment, he could enroll in a GED program at the community college. Prez is skeptical and agrees to help Dookie, but with a warning. He'll visit the community college next week. If Dookie is indeed enrolled, their relationship will be intact. But if he hasn't, Prez muses, "I'll probably never see you again anyway, right?" Dookie agrees to the conditions, but takes the money back to the Araba to spend on drugs. Prez sees this and drives away, disappointed.
Yeah, it does rub it in that little bit more about just how stuck Dookie's become now that, I don't know, perhaps this Araba guy has, through the needle and his own words, convinced Dookie to do this to Prez, as he knows that he might help him. So we meet Prez again for the first time in quite some time. He's grown a bit of a wise man's beard. Does look a little bit more suited to the role. Maybe he should be wearing like a tweed jacket or something with some arm patches, but never mind.
Yeah, he's I do like his beard works well. It sort of does enhance the sense of discipline that he gives out. Although his acting is a little bit dodgy, I think, on when he actually does discipline that kid. It doesn't quite come across genuinely. But really good to see him again. And glad that he settled into his role as the teacher. And they also sort of redo that black and white broken camera thing that we first saw with Prez in season 4, indicating that nothing's changed. Of course, that crack in the camera lens is still there as it was back in season 4. And yeah, there's sort of a kid leaving as well, isn't it? Glaring back at Dookie. We assume that he doesn't remember him, but perhaps he can sort of smell his weakness in this world where it's all about your reputation and the threat you are to another person. So
yeah, well, it does seem to be very instinctual.
Yep.
So Prez gives him the benefit of the doubt and makes his position very clear, which seems fair. Seems like the sort of thing that Prez would do. He has adopted a lot of what Mrs. Donnelly was saying about detaching himself to some extent, but I think he does still reach out a little bit here and understands his limits a little bit better as a teacher. Makes a very fair proposal, and it is pretty. I mean, it is pretty heartbreaking to see Dookie feel the need to betray him in this way, because now all that he's got left, he's got at the end of some alleyway with this Araba guy, and it's just terrible that he has come up with this plan. You know, his situation has turned towards the dope just as he meets with the one person who can help him with his future, and he's come up with the right plan and everything. And yet now we know there's just kind of no hope at all. I mean, we're talking about this GED program that he's not fit for, but the idea is there. You know, he just needs to get back into school. That's really what he needs. It is the least worst out of all of his options, and by some margin, I would say. But no, even during this moment, he has now been manipulated by other means. He's found himself within an institution that I don't think any of us ever really expected, as though it's like the Bubbles institution, if you like. So it's never ending for Dookie at the moment, and I think the only possible sign that some way down the line, a very long way down the line, that there may be good news at some point for Dookie is the idea that obviously goes on to be the new Bubbles, and we know what is going on with Bubbles' life right now. There is this very, very tough time that he's had to go through in order to receive a sort of personal redemption and to return a bit of self-respect. So I guess maybe we can hang on to the fact that some point in the distant future, Dookie could find himself in a deep enough hole that he has to crawl out and really genuinely find something better. But I think his life is going to be containing much, much more tragedy for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, I mean, it is a bit of a what if with the whole Bubbles trajectory, because I mean, Bubbles does have a lot more street smarts than Dookie and a lot more sense of initiative, unfortunately. So I feel like he may, fall into it even deeper than Bubbles ever did. But yeah, it's interesting that he uses a Bubbles excuse as well. I've got sort of $300 to get my own place. Exactly the same reason that Bubbles gave to Greg's back in season 1. Although back then I think it was legit. I think he genuinely did have that way out open to him. But I guess it's just sort of establishing those similarities between the characters. And he sort of means well. He doesn't even realise that he's abusing this relationship with Prez. It's almost like it's just, where's the next drug going to come from? And I think it's very clear that he's already using at this point. He's got the sort of Bubs-esque scratches and marks on his face that we saw from Bubs in the previous seasons. And he's lost a lot of weight as well from his early season 5 days. He was looking a lot healthier at the start of that season. It's almost looking a little bit like he did in season 4. So I don't know why Prez does this. Is it a way of making it more about his expectations of him, trying to make Dookie feel guilty about his actions and feeling sort of, perhaps to get him to learn a lesson, essentially, I guess. But it is a lot of money to give to someone who's probably using, and is sort of obviously using, as far as Prez could probably see. So yeah,
I think from Prez's perspective, like I say, he does give him the benefit of the doubt, and he does make this fair proposition, and I think it is just there as a genuine opportunity for him. He knows what difficulty he's in, and he's there in a position where he can do nothing, and I guess the money isn't that big a deal to him if he knows that he could potentially make a real difference. So Prez, although he is now a bit more of an experienced teacher, I think we've always known that he tries to see the best out of these kids in the situation that he's in. So here, maybe even a little naively, he's willing to go for that lengths for Dookie, someone who he's obviously gone great lengths for in the past. But I can also see why someone might say that this is actually pretty irresponsible.
Yeah.
Because, like you say, giving a lot of money to someone who is, now addicted to a drug like that is potentially going to be killing themselves for that kind of money.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I mean, they are killing themselves, albeit very slowly, but this, that's a possible way of speeding up the process.
Yeah, I mean, perhaps he felt that he would try and coax a confession out of him, or because I think the proposition he gave him was very fair and perhaps was a bit of a curveball to Dookie. He wasn't expecting that much of a challenge to get this money, and to be fair to him, he talks himself out of it quite well. I mean, it still comes across as an excuse, but he's at least saying the right things, and he's at least posing as if he can make a real big difference to this guy's life in a positive way. And yeah, but I guess he just goes with it, and unfortunately it's the wrong choice, and it's tragic for us and for Perez to have to see it.
Yeah, he just ends up with that back with that Arab guy who's just sort of, how much did you get, basically.
Yeah.
Doesn't really endear this junk cart guy to us at all.
No, every time we've seen the Araba, he has been using Dookie. If it were for climbing over whatever it was, spiky fences last week, or this time getting him to bank some drug money. Yeah, so he's managed to ruin the relationship with the only person who's ever really cared about him in some ways, Prez. Yeah, as soon as that money arrives, the Araba's like, oh yeah, let's quickly go to Pimlico. They've got some testers coming up. We're going to be late. It's just it's just so crushing. And the fact that
it's going right back to season 1, isn't it?
Yeah, and there's no hiding from Prez either. It's not like he even pops around the corner. Prez is just in plain view. There's just no shame.
Yeah, no attempt being made to keep this secret. Prez knows exactly what's going on, and there is a very, very, very strong sense of betrayal going on there.
Yeah, I guess Perez has accepted to some extent that he can't help these kids as he thought he could back in the previous season. Also forgot to mention Donnelly's cameo, Miss Donnelly.
Yeah, that's right. I like that she doesn't recognise Dookie at first. It makes sense that her focus has always just been on getting the kids through the system, and he knows who he is. But then once he's gone, that's it. She's not there to be dealing with anymore. So
Yeah, it's a big insight into her job, because don't forget that she clearly knew of Dookie's tragedy, because she gave remember Crystal Judkins? She gave her a box of clothes to deliver to his house, as she was well aware that his folks were stealing the clothes off his back. And yet, when she sees his face like a year or two later, she's just completely forgotten about that tragedy. And it makes you wonder how many she has to deal with each day in this job. She's just conditioned herself to distance herself from one tragedy after another, I guess. But it's nice enough that she does let Prez come down and have a chat with him. I guess she knows that perhaps nothing good can come of it, but that's the way it goes.
all right.
Okay. Anything more with the Dookie strand?
No, I don't think so. Not until we get to his final bit later on, anyway.
Yeah. Okay, we'll attempt that in the montage. We're going to go see our first Baltimore Sun strand. We've just got 2 of them this week. So Baltimore Sun journalist Scott Templeton, desperate for more material to contribute to his aims for a Pulitzer, goes out on the streets to interview homeless people. After a few moments of standing around, he instead finds an inebriated homeless man and then phones in a 911 call, claiming that the man is being kidnapped. When the police arrive, Templeton tells them that the man was being pulled into a van when he arrived. The man is so intoxicated that he can't confirm or deny Templeton's claims. McNulty has been playing with the kids at Beatty's house and is called away as one of the police on this scene. After a few minutes, McNulty grows exasperated with Templeton's transparent lies and sends him away. Afterwards, an undercover police officer dressed as a homeless person, who's been keeping an eye out for the killer, confirms McNulty's suspicions that Templeton was making the story up. Rather than charge Templeton for making a false statement, McNulty allows him to leave. McNulty then heads home to Beatty and surprises her by returning home so early.
Okay. So starting with Scott obviously wandering around, desperate for material there. I think just before that we see them discussing the new coverage that the Sun is putting out, and they're talking about it crediting its own coverage as changing the mayor's mind on, their attitude towards the homeless. So the paper is like leaning on its own stories for success now. We can see this change in style that the paper is going for, which is certainly very reminiscent of the kind of journalism that we see in our newspapers at the moment. Certainly in this country, you see an awful lot of that, of a collection of stories going out, and then the paper saying how well it did in changing people's minds, and then as the I've forgotten that character's name. Is it
Which one? Sorry, the
Rebecca? I've forgotten her second name.
Rebecca. Yeah, she's she's in the Gus camp, isn't she? Yeah.
But she's like foreign affairs editor or something like that. She's sort of looking at that paper and saying about how there are all these quotes that are put aside on the next page that don't even refer to that at all. So the paper has resorted to leaning on its own stories and giving itself a great big slap on the back. So just seeing that real change coming in the way that the paper is presented.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, because the actual intentions of that are quite, noble. It's exactly what Gus would want. You want a story that has been looked at in depth, something that challenges someone's beliefs and possibly changes someone's beliefs, which is exactly what they give themselves credit for, but it's all based on this really sort of shallow foundation. So, it's certainly it's masquerading as the correct news, but it's just the wrong news in so many ways. Scott once again being obsessively deceptive and just deciding to make a really risky 911 call to sort of stage this kidnapping of himself.
Yeah, well, at first he bumps in... First, when Templeton's out there, he bumps into this guy on the floor, and he just kind of leaves it and keeps walking. He's just kind of like, oh, that startled me. I'm just going to keep going this way. And then he seems to actually think about it. And he kind of checks to see that the guy is okay, which at first seems like a perfectly reasonable, noble thing to do. And then this leads into the guy, of course, getting used for some totally ridiculous story about a guy turning up in a grey van, which never actually happens, of course. And it just seems like there is no stopping Templeton and his ability to come up with a story on the spot in any place, whether at work or out. And for some bizarre reason, he doesn't make any real effort at all to keep the whole thing watertight. There is literally no attempt at all that I can see to make some decent facts out of it, to the extent that when McNulty comes along and is questioning him about it and the events that have transpired, it's just a kind of, I'm not too sure, nondescript. He wasn't large, he wasn't small, he wasn't this extreme, he wasn't that extreme. He was pretty much a genuinely all-over average person doing average things. He walked averagely. He was wearing very nondescript clothes. Conveniently, I was not able to get any information whatsoever that would make him identifiable to you. But the horrible kidnapping. Yep, definitely saw that. That was a right mess.
Funny it being you to see this.
Yeah, I mean, he's just not very good. He's just so rubbish at lying. I mean, McNulty is at least makes the effort to keep things nice and consistent and makes it seem like a believable lie. Scott is just useless.
Yeah, it's just this decision here does just not warrant the apparent desperation he's got. It's just, I mean, this move in particular just makes him a very shallow, fraudulent character without any sort of motive that can really be described properly. It's really weird.
He wouldn't last 5 minutes at a much less desperate paper.
Yeah, it's just bizarre, very bizarre.
Makes you wonder how he made it through the the Kansas City Star.
Yeah. Oh dear. Oh well.
900 tornadoes threaten the city.
Oh, definitely. I can imagine. He'd have come up with maybe he was taught.
For I have been blown amongst them.
Yeah. Perhaps this was the mandate of the Kansas City
Sounds
Star.
like a very different story, isn't it?
Perhaps he just was taught by bad people and came to Baltimore Sun and was a bit shocked at the way they did things. But, I mean, then we get that undercover cop, which is quite a cool moment to see some of the strategies that they've been employing to catch this killer. And yet another layer to the pretending, where this undercover cop gives real testimony but under a false pretense of homelessness, even right down to the dollar that he's handing him. So it's a huge oversight from Scott's part. There was loads and loads of witnesses nearby. This was like an established homeless hangout by the look of it. So
it has become pretty shocking, the just the sloppiness with which he's coming up with these stories and everything. And then again, we also see the impact that this serial killer is having on these departments and the city as a whole, and just how much effort is going into catching this phantom killer.
Yeah.
People sort of, this undercover cop guy has obviously gone to great lengths to sell himself as the homeless alcoholic or drug addict or whatever. And, understands how to put on the right performance. He's got to give him $1 to make it look right.
Yeah. Yeah, so it makes sense that he really would have to go with it. It's not just like he's sort of loitering. He's probably going to have to get to know some of these guys, because the best way of, possibly finding this killer is to exchange information and to work out rumours and the rest of it. But obviously it's all bullshit.
Well, he's not doing a Templeton by just sort of casually walking around them and then running away when the dog barks.
Yeah.
I would imagine he's got a little bit more conviction to his integration than that.
Yeah, definitely. Having a little milk and donut.
Yeah.
Okay.
Unforgettable combination.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
Don't you always have milk with your donuts?
Bit of a standout for me, yeah. Absolutely.
I don't think I've had a donut in like 6 months. Don't know. Sometime I would have thought. No
Krispy Kremes. Okay. And then, of course, we get the moment where McNulty goes easy on Scott. Perhaps he's thankful enough for his own insulation from arrest. Wouldn't want to tempt fate by throwing him in the slammer, as much as he'd probably like to. We can't lock up every liar is one of the lines he uses, perhaps in reference to himself as well. Knowing that he is just as bad in some ways as Templeton here. And I guess, that will also draw more attention. He's looking to reduce all the attention and get it out of the headlines. So it probably is the right move to make. And of course, he gets to have his glory moment later on where he gets to rip him to shreds personally and shames him later on, which I'm sure he must have really appreciated.
Yeah, he goes to the full extent of admitting that he's as much a liar as Templeton, but
yeah,
they are not one and the same. They definitely share a lot of differences.
Definitely, yeah. And then just as part of this as well, we have the stuff with McNulty and Beatty, at least the stuff where he's sort of playing with the kids, and then he makes an early return after this hoax call. And he's initially being very transparent with Beatty about the whole case. He's feeding her with all the compromising info about himself and telling her that some bosses know, some bosses don't, and the ones who do know want to keep pretending, which is why I've got to go and keep hiding and masquerading for this. And it's all very much out there. So that's certainly one positive aspect of it.
Does this include his crab claw hand thing? That is supposedly some guaranteed winning method in. I can't remember what it is that they're playing now.
They're playing. I think all he's doing is
is it Ludo or something?
Something. It's literally just to if you use the crab claw, you get a 6 because it's one of those dice throwers that uses the click to get the dice to shake. And lo and behold, he does get a 6. So, but yeah, it was quite funny, and clearly it's
also just before we have. What is it? Bubbles and Waylon eating real crab claws.
That's right, yeah. It's a perfect transition there. One of the ones that The Wire loves.
Although McNulty does seem to forget where he is in that scene because he kind of picks up a phone call and then is like, "Oh, it's fucking bullshit," and it's like there are 2 small children sat right next to you. Have you completely forgotten where you are? So it does seem to forget where he is. Very easy to forget all of a sudden.
Yeah. So so he pops out. He's very abrupt about that and doesn't really make much of a farewell, as is the McNulty way. But he makes it up and he comes back early, straight away. No need to go to the bar, apparently, today. We can already see that he's perhaps reconsidering where he wants to take his life. It sort of seems to instill Beatty with hope. She acts very well in this episode. She doesn't really say anything, I don't think, in this episode, barely at all. The show never explains what her stance is on this future with McNulty, but I feel like her body language suggests that she is very keen to just get him back in, welcome him back, and try and get things back to the way they were. That sort of seems to be the overriding suggestion here.
We can only hope that, given the scale of this whole ordeal and the mess that McNulty has made and the damage that he's caused, we can only hope that it is genuinely enough this time for his season 4 honesty and cleanliness, as it were, both of character and of liver, is gonna stay on, just because of this is a very different event to ones we've seen previous, and I think perhaps Beatty can sense that. She can sense that there is a certain change, and McNulty certainly feels very very remorseful about his actions.
Yeah. So she's perhaps aching with those good season 4 memories and wants to get right back to it.
Yeah, she's obviously very happy for the company and for the affection to be with someone like McNulty, and just wants it to be over and back where they were originally. Yeah,
it's. I'm sure they can do it, hopefully. But I mean, she was always shown to be quite a lonely character, really, wasn't she, in season 2? And I guess this is her option right here. So sort of some sadness to it, but it's nice to see that she is still confident in him in some ways, even if it's perhaps completely misplaced. We don't really know what's going to happen next with McNulty, and we should be smart enough to never predict it because he's a complete loose cannon.
Yeah, you can never quite tell.
Yeah. Okay. So homicide, our first homicide section. Let's have a little look. So McNulty appeals to a disgruntled Jay that he no longer has a need for the additional resources, whilst Bunk looks on amused. Freeman arrives back at headquarters and tells McNulty that Daniels and Perlman know the truth about the Red Ribbon Killer and the illegal wiretap. McNulty wonders aloud why, if the Commissioner and City Hall already know, the two of them haven't already been fired and arrested. Freeman replies that Mayor Carcetti is desperate to save face, after using the serial killer as an excuse to run on a platform of poverty and homelessness. Thinking about it, Lester says we've got almost as much on them as they do on us.
So does this include McNulty's visit to the police headquarters slightly later on?
No, this is just the chat in between them and the bar, so it's quite a short section.
Right, okay, so yeah, they find out that they've been made, and I think, again, we see a bit of a remorse from McNulty here, him saying about, well, it was worth it, wasn't it? You know, he himself maybe isn't entirely certain if the mess that they've made is worth it. That will mainly be told on how Marlo gets out of the situation, if he does, which obviously we find out that he does, and Freeman is showing some concern about that too, but Freeman was always more sure about it. I think he had made a lot of these risks, but at the same time was far more content in what he had in the rest of his life, so that if he were to lose everything that he had with the police, it wasn't going to be quite as big a deal as it were for McNulty, who doesn't really have anything else unless he really is going to try and make an effort with Beatty once again, whereas Freeman is still got of his house miniatures, and he's got to be pretty close to retirement age anyway.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, he was kind of meant to be in retirement, as it were, when he was in the pawn shop unit, so it feels like he's just being a bit of a, rebellious old-timer, and if they want to kick him out, then they will. He'll just go back to Chardine and his miniature carvings. Yeah,
he's definitely got less to lose, hasn't he? And more outlets beyond the police work to actually enjoy. And perhaps that does justify that very brash manoeuvre he made to get on board with McNulty earlier on. But yeah, again, it's just really satisfying to see Freeman being so smart and intuitive with the situation, instantly clocking it up to the pressures that are on Carcetti for governor candidateship. So absolutely good scene, really. And I like we have our final sort of section with Bunker McNulty's sort of jibes between each other when he's sort of like, I can't make shit up. Again, quite a forceful attempt to really shut this thing down as Landsman is very keen to lay on the resources that are there. It's sort of his job to do that.
Yeah, he just wants to make sure that things are actually happening with all of these resources that he supposedly worked very hard to ensure that they keep flowing nicely for McNulty.
Yeah.
And McNulty is obviously not interested in using any of them, so it's not until later on that we see that there's not much love lost there in reality, but at the time, I think obviously Landsman is under pressure to make sure that these resources are being used.
Yeah, definitely. And they do have a couple of nice little exchanges here with Bunk. I like McNulty again. He's very open about this whole situation. He just instantly tells Bunk that the bosses know, which really ratchets the tension up. And I like how Bunk then compares the whole thing to the war on drugs. It's, once you start it, you can't really finish it, or just the war in general. And we've seen both Carver and Slim Charles having made the same points on previous occasions.
Yeah, it's a very common point to be made in the show.
Yeah.
Once you in it, you in it.
Definitely. And then we have our bit where McNulty's on his way to Kavanagh's for the chat with Freeman, and he has to jump in the lift with Daniels. Which is, again, ripped straight from Season 1 when Rawls and Forster shared that lift awkwardly in Season 1. Except it's underlined much more nicely this time with a to be continued.
Well, during the lift ride itself, we have Daniels being the most intimidating statue in the world.
Yeah.
And then, like you say, exiting with his to be continued, featuring a sort of surveillance shot that is very similar to something we might have expected to see in Season 1.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, I think we've seen the exact same lift from that perspective in Season 1 itself, so sort of bringing us right back to that full circle sense of things. Okay. All right. Should we go on to our next section?
Okay.
All right. So we're going to see our first Bubbles section. So while Fletcher passes out newspapers on Bubbles' morning shift, Bubbles reads the article Fletcher has finished about him. Bubbles is touched that Fletcher finds his life story so inspiring, but at the same time has reservations about revealing the details of his friend Sherrod's death to the world. Fletcher maintains that readers would find Bubbles' life story thought-provoking, but Bubbles remains unconvinced. Bubbles allows Wayland to read the article Fletcher wrote, which leaves Wayland with a smile. This guy gets you, he explains to Bubs, going on to say that the article didn't pull its punches and weighs him objectively, and in the end convinces Bubbles that it's not the negative aspects of the article that he fears. Indeed, Bubbles admits that since Sherrod's death he's been unwilling to call himself a fundamentally good person. Bubbles finally agrees to have the article printed. Bubbles tries to share some crabs with his sister when he gets home. She is reluctant but takes the crabs.
So as the antithesis of Templeton's fabrications and inability to integrate, we see that Fletcher is very much involved in Bubbles' life, and here he is actually helping him out with his job and making the best possible story that he can about him and showing him an awful lot of solidarity. And it's very warming to see some genuinely great journalism going on here. So it's nice to see him in that editing position later on in our closing closing period of the episode. Yeah,
very nice. Very humbling of Fletcher to just get involved, hand out those Sun newspapers at sunrise, and Bubs yet again sort of closing in on himself with regard to those touchy aspects relating to Sherrod. And then, of course, we later learn that this is actually an excuse for Fletcher. He's actually more concerned about the positive portrayal of himself, because he can't come to terms with that. It feels unjustified to him. It feels dishonest. And it's, as Wayland tells him, that has to come from him. That's not actually the true perspective on the matter. That's just his, lack of self-esteem, and he needs to build it up. And he does a very good job of hitting the right buttons there.
Yeah, certainly. I think Bubbles makes an interesting point about the fact that there are still plenty of people around there who have done much the same things that he is doing and haven't necessarily been getting high or having to go to the same desperation that he has, and thus he feels less inclined to call himself a good person. But I think what Wayland is getting at is that his goodness as a person, his desire to improve and to do better for those around him and to do better for those that have shown some kind of respect or belief in him, comes from the fact that what he has gone through in order to get there. I mean, sure, we appreciate in the story, as Wayland says, that they've not really pulled any punches on him. They've made it clear where he has come from and what decisions he's made in his life.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's because of what he's done in the face of that and how he's finally managed to pull himself out to a stronger position that there's no reason why he can't feel pride in that, and he can't use that as a source of energy to move forward and to be more confident. We have seen that Bubbles is perfectly capable of having that kind of self-confidence. We've seen it plenty of times before when he went out enterprising with his Bubbles depot, for example.
Yeah. Oh, definitely, yeah. So it's an important lesson for him to learn, and I like that Wayland makes it clear that the article says that the good trumps the bad, but it's not letting you off the hook. I quite like the way he puts that. It's the sort of balance that you'd want. And yeah, just learning to love himself. And then he gives him that interesting quote, doesn't he? Holding back from the suffering is the suffering you're looking to avoid all along. Which is a lot of food for thought. Just sort of embracing life a little bit more.
It's kind of like, much like when McNulty gets a bit of a message from those FBI guys who do the profiling, the psychometric testing, whatever it is. Much like they deliver a message to him without really realising it. I think Fletcher is delivering this message to Bubbles without necessarily realising it as well. It's closer to home than he realises.
Yeah, definitely. And we see perhaps one of the big reasons why he can't see himself in a more positive light is when he goes back home and his sister is still so incredibly wary of him. wary to even accept his kind offer of crabs. Perhaps thinking that he'll try and make her owe something later on. There's still this level of distrust, and reinforces to Bubs that he's not a person that should be appreciated. I think symbolically seeing him at the top of the stairs for the first time is good. He's sort of close to making that final breakthrough with her, and clearly she's torn about this. Perhaps now is a good time to really open up to Bubs a bit more and put that trust into him. But it's the fact that a very close family members of his is still acting like that around him. It must be very, very hard for Bubs to look past that.
Yeah, it is. It is that last hurdle in order to really give himself the confidence that he needs. I can understand perhaps why she might be a little distrustful of him, considering what may have happened in the past to kick him out of there. But at the same time, I was going to say, much like you did, that it's nice that the way they have Bubbles sort of climbing to the top of those stairs, and we see him very, very close to his goal at last. And so when we do get to the end, we have made that full transition. He really has climbed the stairs over time and has reached that point of acceptance, which is great.
Yeah, definitely, yeah. Of course, we have the crab claw, which is linking with the McNulty scene. And I just like the way Fletcher puts it. Fletcher sort of implores Bubbles to really consider opening himself up for that wider public perception, as this is one of the sort of articles that will enrich those who read it. And he says that it's going to really put your issue on the public front and try to get people to see your type from a different perspective to that of what your exterior might suggest. And that's kind of exactly what Gus wants, and it's also kind of the Wire in microcosm form. What the show is trying to convey to the world, and the analogy is true right down to the Resistance. To have it broadcast publicly from Bubbles, it's very hard to actually get it on the page.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, okay, that's the first Bubbles. That's most of the Bubbles, actually. There's a small section later. Alright, should we move on to our second and final Baltimore Sun section?
Alright,
so there's quite a lot in here. In the Sun's newsroom, Fletcher allows Haynes to read his article on Bubbles in the newsroom, and Haynes wholeheartedly approves. Later, Haynes is adamant about refusing to print Templeton's falsified story about the attempted abduction. His boss, Kleber, now accuses him of having a personal vendetta. He moves Templeton's article to another editing desk and warns Haynes that his attitude could cause problems for him down the line. Haynes outright accuses Scott Templeton of lying about the abduction, which he claims took place, causing an outraged Scott to throw his notes. Afterwards, Alma approaches him and reveals that the notebook Templeton had thrown during their earlier argument was empty, despite claims from Scott that it contained notes on all the details of the attempted kidnapping. Pushed over the edge, Haynes takes the file he's compiled on Templeton's indiscretions and confronts his superiors in their office. So this covers pretty much all of Gus's final moments, really, apart from when he speaks to Alma at the end. Yeah. And it kicks off with the old school corner, so it's Fletcher, Rebecca and Gus, who are very much the old guard. They want to protect their old school journalism that seeks to really explore issues before putting them on the page and give them the time that's needed. I quite like the quote, "I remember clean," from Gus there. And he's clearly approving of the way Fletcher is carrying himself following the Bubbles get to know you session, I guess we could call it.
exactly. And following this information that is arising about Templeton from his old friend, was it Robert Ruby, is it his name?
Yeah, that's right, the London dude.
London bureau guy who has obviously been moved or fired or made redundant. He, from the information that he's got from there, is very much running out of patience for someone like Templeton, who is now quite actively a part of the way in which the paper is changing around Gus. He's no longer in control of any of this, whereas he felt before he might have had a strong influence on the way that things were run at the paper. Now that is certainly not the case, and thus he is starting to push it further up with Whiting and Kleber now and make a real issue of it, and it's going to end up being his downfall. Unfortunately, it's not going to have the effect of them turning around and saying, you know what, you're right, maybe we should have this kind of approach on it, or you're right, we do have no integrity. Like, maybe whatever it is that he's expecting, he's not going to get it, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Especially when people like Klebenau, for instance, are very much hearing what they want to hear. I think this is why they do come across as a little bit one-dimensional, is that they do ignore any kind of pragmatic side to it. And after everything that's happened, they don't seem to have any kind of questioning of any of the facts that are coming round. They are just accepting it all. Yeah. And despite what is obviously being suggested by Gus, Klebenau is still like, are you calling the other reporter a liar? And it's like, I think it's pretty obvious that he is at this stage.
Yeah, they're just not reasonable. You can't actually reason with them. They're completely closed books, which is not really what you'd expect of them, really. And then Klebenau really rubs it in when he's sort of first, I think he claims that, I know you're jealous of all the traction the story's getting, but, this is getting personal between you two. It's just a complete sort of trying to change the subject and completely belittle Gus in the process.
Taking away the facts and making it all about emotion.
Yeah, exactly.
That's very much what they want to do with their storytelling. So
perfect. Yeah, there we go. So it's both Gus's and Klebenau's biggest moment. I do think Gus really does say some quite tempting arguments that, as we saw, Klebenau doesn't entertain. Explains the rules behind the lie, the fact that it starts with a truth and then spirals outwards from there in a series of exaggerations that eventually become complete deceptions. It's kind of the speech that we've been waiting for, I guess, that big grandstand.
The same is it's also making a statement about what's happened with McNulty as well. It always does start with something true. It did start with some basic facts that McNulty was able to use as confirmed and then manipulate into a much, much larger story. So it's kind of saying that about the serial killer plot as well. But comparative to that, it's it really does make out Templeton to be the hack that he is, and you can see why someone like Gus is just so frustrated and is willing to make it a very big deal with someone like Klebenau. So we do get this big showdown that we come to expect.
Yeah, and I mean the gravity of the situation is different than with Daniels. It's a lot higher up with Daniels, but Gus is actually more compromised than Daniels even is here. Daniels could relatively safely reveal the whole deception to his boss Carcetti, whereas Gus is really tempting fate to compromise himself completely, just revealing it to his boss, let alone the public. So he's actually more screwed than a lot of the people in the show here. Based on the sort of mandate of his bosses.
Yeah, they just see him as stirring up a bit of trouble, and we're just going to move this story through another desk now. So
yeah,
that's it. They're just kind of moving it around him so that he's not a troublemaker in that instance, and it ends up, the end result for him basically ends being putting him out of the situation where he can cause any kind of difficulties like that.
Yeah, and when he has a chat with that London reporter, as you were saying, Ruby, whatever it's called, what I like is that he establishes the stakes for this. It sort of just comes across that they're just lying and they're just going to get away with it and it's going to be a Pulitzer. But, he does say, look, if someone does do a fact check and re-reports this stuff for another paper, it could get very ugly. I don't know if that's a plausible possibility. I mean, the show is perhaps suggesting that all newspapers are gravitating towards this and therefore this situation will never arise, but you can assume that there are some differences in mandate at various newspapers, and perhaps this will be a problem that does surface in the future. But as Gus says, Klebenau and Whiting are probably hoping to move up much higher very quickly based on this sort of bouncing off point, so perhaps it's not really close to the front of their minds at all.
Yeah, a lot of people seeing it as a launch pad rather than a good paper that they could be doing a good job at. So that's a little topic that was raised right at the beginning of the season, of course, where we have Klebenau and Templeton and Gutierrez talking about whether or not it's a good paper and having this discussion about it. And I think ultimately that's one of the main divisions in the paper itself, is whether or not it's a place of work and a place to practice their craft, or whether it's a place to gain advancement. It is that in itself is one of the largest divisions within the paper.
Yeah, and across the whole show, really, absolutely. And then, of course, we get to the end of the argument with Gus and Templeton, and he decides to bring his own sting out at the end, trying to say it's all about Pulitzers, which it is, but, you know, obviously making the bosses aware of that is kind of a little bit demeaning. And you get the sense that he really came in just wanting to make the bosses aware of this and sort of totally lost control and had no idea that he'd actually end up with this eventual outrage. And then Templeton storms out and has a really weird response, sort of half-hearted attempt at denial, and then makes a really big point about all these facts being in his notes, which doesn't mean anything since Templeton actually wrote them. You know, the fact that these things are in my notes doesn't mean that they're suddenly true because they're on ink. It's just very, very weird. Even if
he's trying to convince himself now, it feels like, at this stage.
Yeah, but perhaps it is. But obviously we later find out that there aren't even notes in that notepad. But, you know, if they were, we've seen him writing in that notepad based on a fictional phone conversation at a payphone before. So, you know, it's not the sort of thing that's going to get you off the hook.
Well, that's why I think that he's just contributing as part to this own, you know, this self-deception almost. He's telling all of these lies, but he's got to make sure that he believes it enough. Otherwise, it's just eventually too much for him to handle because his whole life is essentially based on a lie. So he's got to help to, you know, make it make sense to himself. He's got to rationalise it, even if it is poorly rationalised by doing this. Oh, well, I've done all my work. It's, you know, right here in this notebook. And of course, it's not. He hasn't done anything at all. He's just gone out of his way to fabricate some nonsense and then come home and collect his paycheck, and that's it, really.
Yeah.
So it's just very, very. You're right. It is a very strange comment to be making because it's not really contributing to the point. Not really contributing to the point that he's making with Gus.
Definitely.
And also
then,
not very smart to leave said blank notebook on the side, right, as he makes a point about it being full of notes.
He actually throws it on the floor, revealing its empty pages, I imagine. But yeah, he's just losing it. The guy's losing it. He just seems to be a bit ill at this point, to be honest. Then I think
it might be a slightly bit more believable if they'd made him some kind of alcoholic or something.
Yeah. I mean, it's got to the point where it's just beyond the plausibility of anything, really.
He's just an absolutely...
He's parodying his former self now at this point, isn't he, really? So, yeah.
Yeah, he's got a serious, like, mental condition, it seems, where he's you know, can't help but tell lies in everything that he does. And I think once it reaches that stage, you start to question how he's actually ended up in this position. I mean, surely no one can go through their life just being a liar. Eventually, you get found out. You can't just tell lies about everything.
Yeah.
Eventually you get found out. Maybe it only really started once he got to the Baltimore Sun because he considered that his advancement point. You know, maybe he used to be a very competent journalist, who knows? But he starts to get so wrapped up in himself here that it becomes a little bit of a parody.
And then following on from that, Gus goes and has a chat with Luxembourg, who is sort of on the same rank as him. We see. I don't quite understand the chain of command in the paper, but he sort of seems to be his confidant, and he's very much the bunk in this situation. He wants Luxembourg to go in with him to back him up on this whole thing. He's about to reveal the case that he's built against Templeton, and Luxembourg, you know, his heart's in the right place, but he values the chain of command to at least a similar or greater extent than you know, the actual truth of the matter. And knowing that the file he's built against Scott will be bad news for both of those guys, he takes the bunk approach and, you know, appreciates the gesture but doesn't actually act on it.
Yeah, he's not going to sacrifice himself for the sake of Scott, it seems.
Yeah.
A big deal for the great principled Gus, but not for Mr. Luxembourg.
Nope. And then Gus hasn't really decided whether he's going to go and reveal this stuff yet. I think it's when that Alma comes over and reveals the empty pad. It's like the final straw. He just sort of storms up in fury. Can't live with this fakery. So yeah, he's sort of tempting fate and handing in Scott's pad and his resignation at the same time. We sense he knows that he probably can't get out of this one. So. And yeah, it's kind of scary to see how alone he is in this fight. Everyone else is just sort of standing there and gawping, not willing to really take a side. I guess as editor, it's his responsibility more than anyone else's to investigate these things. But it is nice to find out later on that Alma did go in later on to back him up, and to show the empty notebook to these guys, which also got her fired. So yeah, it's a very sour ending for a lot of these guys in the paper.
One can only assume that Klebanow and Whiting are fully aware of what's going on, especially once this evidence, as it were, has been presented to them by Gus. They just seem to be willfully ignoring it. They're just quite happy to let it go on. If it's going to win the paper some recognition, it wouldn't be getting otherwise.
Yeah.
And it's doing it in a sort of simpler way than what Gus might be proposing.
Definitely, yeah.
But this path of legitimacy seems to gain Alma and Gus, at the very least, a sort of reassignment and demotion, respectively.
Yeah.
But certainly not something that's going to be rewarded, and thus it's not a culture that's going to be growing inside the Baltimore Sun anytime soon.
Yeah, it's trying to be stamped out as quick as possible, absolutely. We also get, during these scenes, the David Simon cameo. The second, actually. He also appeared in season 2.
Yeah.
As the same reporter, but he was out in the field at this point trying to interview Sobotka as he was being arrested.
Yeah, it just kind of pops up here just before Scott is saying that he's ill and is going to go home or whatever. So, yeah, it just has a little tiny flash of a moment, easy to miss him. But he does pop up sort of on the phone or at his desk.
Yeah.
Pencil behind the ear, I believe.
That's the one, yeah. I'm sure that's the way he always did business. And then, that scene is the sort of final scene where we see Templeton throw in the towel. This is actually after McNulty's given him a dressing down.
Yeah.
But, Klebanow sort of pops over and, with his dream having died in that police department under McNulty's watch, he knows there's no future for it, really. He's luckily for him, though, he's already done enough to earn himself a Pulitzer, it seems. He's not going to, as we see at the end, so...
Okay, so what's next?
Okay, so we're going to go to the second Stamfield organisation. I think it's the... it's going to be the second courthouse section.
Okay.
All right, so lawyer Morris Levy goes through the Stamfield arrest warrants, convinced that something is amiss. Herc assures him that a wiretap is the most likely means by which Marlo is brought down, and Levy learns that the only 4 people who knew the group's meeting code were the 4 arrested. Considering the speed with which the code was broken, mere hours after their arrest, Levy is confident that the police used an illegal wiretap to decipher the code beforehand. He later tells Perlman that he's aware of the discrepancy, making it clear that whatever fraud was present in the case will be aired in court.
Okay, so yeah, just picking apart what's been going on and going to be going on to make their demands and make it very clear that Marlo is not going anywhere near prison. So this has been nicely figured out by Levy, who certainly at the time believes that he has just the right move to make everything right for his client.
Yeah, that's right. So just Levy's cogs whirring again, and Herc somewhat clunkily trying to provide useful advice, and making it very clear that he has no idea where the number came from, perhaps overstressing that point. Just that. And then, of course, we get the great scene again, Perlman's second, knockout blow, as it were, in the courthouse again, in the corridors of the courthouse. As she gets to make an offhand reference to some dirt, it's interesting that Levy doesn't buy into that at all. He's sort of far too complacent and comfortable to read anything into it, unlike Freeman, who saw her suggestion as a real threat when she mentioned that the truth was to be considered quite thoroughly.
Yeah.
It's a shame that we get this sort of courtroom drama stuff right at the end. I quite enjoy this stuff, only a real dose in the last hour.
I guess it this does help build up to the slight dismantling of Levy a bit later on, as his complacency is shown to be not too well placed.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we'll get to that very shortly. We're just going to go to our second homicide section now. So unfortunately for McNulty, another homeless man is found murdered with a white ribbon tied around his wrists. McNulty, Bunk and Kima arrive on scene. Distraught that McNulty's entirely fictitious serial killer has inspired a copycat. Camera crews immediately begin to arrive on the scene as they argue, though it's fairly obvious that McNulty is now feeling great remorse for taking the course of action. As the incident appears on televisions across Baltimore, Mayor Carcetti is watching as well. Did somebody not get the message, he deadpans, exasperated.
So this is something that McNulty always tried to use as certain excuses every now and again about copycats. But now a real one has happened. And this is just helping compound to McNulty's remorse about the whole incident, and that whereas he was getting homeless people involved, they started off as people who had already been killed, which obviously is sad enough, but it wasn't like it was McNulty that was killing them.
Yeah.
Then we have him going a bit further by sort of kidnapping this homeless man and sending him off somewhere else to have him be a victim. And now the process that he's gone through has encouraged a copycat. So essentially the decisions that he's made are indirectly getting people killed. So hopefully this is all coming down as a bit of a ton of bricks for McNulty, who is starting to feel even more strongly against this whole case and wants to be out of it as soon as possible.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's an initially harmless deception has become pretty, just as murderous as it was originally deceived to be, in some ways.
Well, it's causing real murders now, so it's they've got to be very, very, very careful.
Definitely, yeah. And we get a little call back to Greg's start at homicide when she's so dismayed at the fact that there's a ribbon that she wonders whether Bunker's set her up on it, which would be pretty dark if he did, but, it's always worth begging the question. And, an absolutely distraught McNulty. McNulty instantly tries to shirk the responsibility when they put it on him. He's sort of too scared to face that, and I love how Greg's jibes back. There's a lot of jibing back at people this episode. They've eliminated one suspect, which is pretty cutting, and he's also very quick to get everyone up on the speed on the boss's situation. He sort of says straight up, the bosses know about this stuff. And then, of course, Greg's reaction sort of instantly turns around, making it pretty clear, perhaps, that she was responsible for this. I'm not too sure. I think later on we discover that McNulty didn't pick anything up on this, but she is very uncomfortable when this does occur. And it feels very, very real, the way she sort of gets out of there.
Yeah, just asking them to give them a little bit of space.
Yeah.
With the TV cameras arriving and sort of hearing of some kind of homeless murder, and that's it. They've got to be straight on it as a matter of course for their campaign to keep the spotlight on this serial killer. So all of these conversations that they're having are now pretty much in the public domain, as well as things are, the cameras start rolling as soon as they get there. Yeah,
it's quite funny. This whole argument they then have is portrayed, as you say, on national news, although there's no audio, thankfully. And we get to see Carcetti watching it in real time. So it really represents the lie there. And a good moment here between McNulty and Bunk again, despite Bunk having had some sort of leanings towards the benefits of the serial killer deception. He now has the chance to lay the sort of final stake into McNulty, as he reminds him of his initial advice back in episode 3, that you should not play with this fire, it's only going to get you to a bad place. And I think he says to him, you played with fire and now everyone's getting burned. So the second time he's heard this, Freeman initially gave him this advice, but this time everyone is feeling the burn. It's, as we mentioned before, sort of everyone's ended up with blood on their hands if they like it or not.
That's right, yeah. It's implicated pretty much anyone and everyone who can get involved with it.
Yeah.
And thus they have.
Yeah, and as McNulty says, the lie's gotten so big that no one can actually take it anymore, I guess.
it's somewhat it shows the progression from bunks, the bigger the lie, the more they believe. Well, in fact, it does reach a certain point where it becomes so big that it reaches a sort of critical mass, and people can't handle it anymore. Especially when the inevitable truth comes out, it becomes something where people just malfunction. They realize that even if they come clean, they sacrifice everything that they themselves have invested in it, and or even if they try to sweep it under, it's just far too much for them to take on at once. They just it just seems to cause people to collapse with confusion. So I think the bigger the lie, the more they believe, but there is definitely a threshold for that, the size of said lie.
Yeah, I like how Daniel's his wife Marla, their discussion later on also echoes that when they talk about bending lies until they break, or whether they're already broken before they break, and it's sort of the same sort of thing, which is very nice.
That's right. Yeah, it's a good reminder of a slightly different wording, but certainly.
And then we get Carcetti giving his TV a little smash just to get his anger out.
He's a good shot with that remote.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a minor damage in the grand scheme of things, but there we go. I think that covers our second homicide section. Anything more from you, or should we go on to our second Bubbles?
No, let's move on.
Okay, so final Bubbles. Bubbles reads his article in the paper as he shops for groceries in a local market. He appears to be pleased and at peace with the story. He puts on a pair of sunglasses and continues to go about his day. And that's it. We have our big moment for Bubs.
Yeah, feeling a lot better about himself, and things are definitely looking up. It's finally a positive story for Bubbles, and that is just comes to its conclusion in the montage. So it's nice that we're getting built up for at least one happy ending.
Yeah, it's nice that Bubs is at peace with sort of being known at large to the public, and you can see that he feels a little bit like a celebrity here.
There is an element of that.
Yeah, definitely, and finally feeling comfortable in his own skin. And of course, the sunglasses are the sort of demonstration of that pride, or the fact that he has an element of loving himself to a certain extent, rather than self-loathing. And strutting along the street with confidence. Everything about him has completely changed, having read this article and being at peace with it. And for the first time, I think, in the show, he's going about his business as a citizen, rather than as a dope fiend or someone who's stuck in the psychological trauma of that world. So, very small moment, but I think it sort of almost warrants its own little section here, because it is a very important change in the way Bubs is operating.
Yeah, we're seeing a Bubbles, like you say, is just a man of the people now, and doing a bit of ordinary shopping around this market area. You can expect him to be doing something like that without any kind of game or scheme or ulterior motive to get high out of it. He's just able to find a bit of normality and peace in his life, which is great.
Yeah. I like to think...
I suppose we should really start calling him Reginald as well, rather than Bubbles.
Yeah, true that. Reggie. Good old Reggie. I like to think that the groceries he's taking home are for the meal that he promises to cook up for his sister. Although, and which we later see him eating in the montage, perhaps. Although I think he comes straight out from the basement, doesn't he? So perhaps the sister cooked it, but it's all building up to this moment of acceptance in the montage, as you say. But let's not forget,
gearing us up for that.
Yeah, and as I said last week, he's come far, but he's now just in the first steps of mending relations with his family. It's a long journey ahead, I guess, and there is that degree of ambiguity still. But overall, it's probably the happiest ending in the show. So.
Yeah, certainly.
Okay, that's Bubbles. We'll get back to a little bit with him in the montage. For now, let's move over to our third courthouse section. A lot of fun with Levy here. So, Rupert Bond and Rhonda Perlman are told by Carcetti's chief of staff to settle the Stanfield case out of court as quietly as possible, using whatever leverage they can to keep the illegal wiretaps from being brought to light. Perlman meets with Maury Levy at the courthouse and later in his office and plays the taped conversation given to her by Freeman. In it, Levy is incriminated by offering to purchase sealed court documents, an offence for which he could serve 10 to 12 years. Perlman blackmails him into settling into Stanfield cases out of court, settling the Stanfield case is out of court. Chris Partlow will plead guilty to all of the murder charges in the vacant row houses and accept life imprisonment without parole. Monk and Cheese will plead guilty to possession with intent to sell and serve up to 20 years each. And the charges against Marlo will be abated under the agreement that he step out of the drug business permanently. There we have it.
So yeah, this starts with Steintorf again keeping things moving in the way that he wants to. Wants things sorted nice and quietly. Doesn't want there to be any fuss, and certainly doesn't want it going into a courtroom. And I think Pullman has, like we were discussing earlier, she has that good mix of understanding the need for discretion whilst also knowing how to push people's buttons in a few instances. And I don't think there's anybody she would. I don't think there's anybody she would rather get into a bit of a tussle with than Levy. It's definitely someone she would like to see a bit of a downfall from there. And Freeman has provided this excellent evidence with which to do it. And I like that we start out in that scene with her and Levy, with this, the tape recorder being placed on the table, and his face very quickly drops as he hears his own voice.
Oh yeah, it's very, very satisfying. And we have that little moment beforehand as well with Steintorf that sort of precedes it, where he makes it clear that any sort of backroom negotiation, and by extension the obstruction of justice, as Levy puts it, is preferable to going with the protocol in terms of making it go away. And he also, of course, strongly assures them of promotions if they can succeed at this. There's a very big hint dropped. And yeah, I mean, as you say, that finally we see a new facial expression for Levy that doesn't involve smugness. It's like a really nice, refreshing change of pace for him. And as soon as that dictaphone is up on the table, he's looking pretty damn uncomfortable. He didn't expect anything to come of that threat that Rhonda implied in their previous conversation.
Yeah, and with Steintorf, we're just seeing that furthered Carcetti administration trick of offering these guarantees of promotions or advancements or money. I mean, we've already got, half the state funds being given away straight away, so it's not going to be a very pretty sight once he gets to governor, because he's going to have offered so many people favours and whatnot that he's going to have almost no choices available to him at all. He's already promised all of these positions to everyone.
Yeah.
Although, to be fair, in the instance of someone like Pullman, any advancement that she gets, we can't help but feel is deserved. And as we see in the montage, it is a position that she feels very, very suitable for.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very good point. So it's
like good things can come out of these very shady arrangements.
Yeah, I think that's a big point that the final montage makes, isn't it? It's a very sort of peppery mixture of good and bad, mostly leaning towards bad, but there are a few victories that come out of it here and there, and this is definitely one of them. And just, I mean, what an episode for Rhonda, who's generally, she's not been necessarily a side character, but she hasn't really stepped up to have a big moment, and she has sort of three in one here, the hat trick, with this one being the most impressive, where they have this sort of lawyer off, I guess you could call it, between Levy and Pullman, and they're both quoting various laws or case examples that would potentially compromise the other in the context of their predicament, and fantastic negotiation skills. They even raise a couple of cases where lying cops have been deemed acceptable if the end game is justified. And Levy points out it's very risky, but Pullman's confident that perhaps in this case it would be looked at favourably. And it seems very noble, of course, but if you do think about what's going on, we're reminded that Pullman has broken just as bad as McNulty in some ways. She's now obstructing the truth to reach a greater means, which is again the arrest of Marlo. Everyone's got the bug now, they're all under the spell. Just sort of Pullman, I think, peaking as a character right here. They sort of shelve the evidence against Marlo and suggest they're willing to use it if Marlo ever goes near the street again. Even if it means Freeman and McNulty have to get jailed in the process. I think it sounds like Pullman's angry enough that may well be what she's happy with.
She certainly does very well here. Like you say, she's always been very key in a lot of these investigations, and obviously somewhat of a gatekeeper when it comes to them getting hold of resources and the right kind of jurisdiction and courthouse muscle that they may need to have all of their investigations go through. So it's nice that she gets a big payoff here, and like I say, she's obviously very happy to end up making a move on someone like Levy, who has been somewhat of a nemesis for her.
Yeah. So, guess thinking in the big picture, that what this deal means is that Marlo actually is still given quite a lot of power. He has McNulty and Freeman's fates in his hands. They're not necessarily off the hook if he does decide to go back into the game, and I'm not sure he can actually stop himself. I'm not sure that's within him to be able to do. They're going to reopen that case, and that could, of course, implicate McNulty and Freeman if their actions are not deemed to be justified for the greater means. So, and yeah, despite the fact that it feels like a victory, I think Freeman does sort of bring a sobering reminder later on that all the most responsible people are getting to walk here, and those who are complicit but less deserving of the punishment are taking that collateral damage. So people like Monk and Cheese, which, you know, obviously we want them behind bars, but yeah, Marlo is obviously the one that's the target, that's the one that people are going to be happy with seeing locked up finally.
Yeah, he's been juggled around a little bit here.
Yeah.
I don't know if he's fully aware of the amount of attention and value being placed on his current position behind bars, but I'm sure he would be very happy to have his name ringing out as a person of importance no matter what.
Yeah. Definitely, yeah. And in theory, I mean, the actual punishment for him is just as good for the street as it would be as if he was put in jail, assuming that he is able to stick to that clause of not going back into the game. Despite it being a kind of soft punishment, it would have that effect. I don't think he's going to be able to stick to it, and of course we're going to have to get back to the old going to dig up the case again. But yeah, it's a great set of scenes.
Okay.
Alright, so that's our courthouse strand dealt with. Let's go and see homicide again. So, third homicide section. McNulty is berated by Daniels and Commissioner Rules, who are equally upset about his fabrication of the murders and the new copycat killer. They encourage him to catch the copycat quickly, allowing the press to assume he's the original killer and clean up the whole mess. Regardless, they explain this will be the last case McNulty ever works. Luckily, McNulty proves himself again, using evidence found on the victim to identify the killer, a mentally ill homeless man whom McNulty had met twice before. During interrogation, Templeton visits the department and interrupts to profit from the recent murders, hoping to comment on a photo array of suspects. McNulty exposes that he knows of his lies and berates him. The department charges the man with 2 of the 6 murders, both of which the man actually committed, and allows him to be sent to a psychiatric facility rather than put him on trial. The media and the public are led to believe that the Red Ribbon Killer has thus been caught. McNulty and Freeman are both informed that they won't be fired, but will never be involved in investigative police work again.
Okay, so starting off with Rules and Daniels as they block him within that interrogation room. Again, Daniels very much mastering the art of being the world's most intimidating statue.
Yeah. Imagine that if he were actually, they did build a homage to him in the city. That would be incredibly frightening.
Just it's got that stare down.
Yeah.
He certainly knows how to stare at McNulty anyway.
It's a good double team because Rules is really bringing out the intimidation tactics as well, but his are a little bit more conventional. Yeah. And it's cool to see McNulty actually being berated by Rules. We haven't seen that in a long time. I guess once they'd both left the homicide unit and Rules flew a long way up the chain, they've had no chance to sort of relive some of these iconic season 1 and 2 shouting matches they used to have. That they used to be very, some of the highlights of the show. So it's nice that there's an excuse to get them back in a room together, and it's brilliantly acted by John Doman particularly. He really brings out the big guns for his final sort of dressing down of McNulty.
Yeah, it is great. We do get another one a bit later on as well.
That's right, yeah.
But certainly here, when he's giving him the full intimidation, it's a great showdown and the likes of one we haven't seen in a little while. He also raises an interesting point, actually, and it is something that you do forget about easily as being a big deal. Certainly, it's not made a big thing by McNulty, but he and Freeman and others have been profiting heavily off this serial killer. You know, all of this overtime and extra work that they've been doing has no doubt been filling their bank accounts quite handsomely for Freeman as well, and Sidner, and the extra work that's being done in the detail. A lot of people are making a lot of money off this. It's something that Rules points out here that I think is perhaps easily forgotten amongst the other more evident upfront ethical and moral dilemmas that are going around. They're also making a whole bunch of money off it, even if that is not an issue to them and they're not doing it for the money. It's still a gain that they're making. It's not like they're giving it away straight away and saying, oh, it genuinely isn't about the money, I'm giving this money away. They're still quite happy to take that enlarged paycheck at the end of the month, I'm sure.
Yeah, that's a very good point, actually. Yeah, I mean, Rules being Rules, does think about the financial implications, and I think you're right that because we know Freeman and McNulty are so nobly intentioned about the work itself, it's easy to forget that the actual paperwork comes down to finances a lot of the time, and that's the way to actually quantify things. And yeah, that could be a huge implication of it. It's kind of theft in some lights. So,
and naturally, as is what has been rolled out from the Carcetti administration, this is being moved on as quietly as possible. So they're not going to fire them. They're not going to be making any examples out of them or anything like that. They just want McNulty to essentially work this new case with the copycat in such a way that allows them to, also move on their main serial killer and just get some poor guy who clearly has absolutely no idea what he's doing or saying into a position where he becomes the big bad nasty guy without realising it.
Yeah. Yeah, so McNulty looking very sheepish following on from this, and Daniel is obviously giving us that final sentence, as we always love him to do. It's your final case. Work it. So
it's very much along the lines of do your job.
To be continued. So yeah, it's very much just gotta love Daniels, and I like the fact I like the looking at him as a statue. That sort of does change my perspective on things a little bit. It's quite funny.
Especially in the lift. He's so still. There's dust settling on that man.
Oh, brilliant. Oh, dear.
And then are we including the second showdown between McNulty and Rules?
I think that might be... that does include it, actually, yeah. But I think it's worth mentioning the other funny bit in this one when Rules genuinely considers whether McNulty's been killing them himself, because it's almost not out of the question, considering how surreal the whole situation is to everyone right now. The lie is so big that there's nothing that's off the cards in terms of plausibility.
Yeah, they might as well make sure that they have removed all doubt of any possible situation that they can consider.
Oh yeah, definitely. What I would say is before we get to that second showdown, we get McNulty very quickly proving himself and doing that investigation and solving the investigation in the course of like an hour by the looks of it, when he goes down to the homeless camp, this time by daylight. And sees the copycat dude who, as you mentioned last week with the business cards, has been leaving some key evidence around.
That's right.
Including the white ribbon. And yeah, I mean, what an absolute stroke of luck as well. They all of a sudden have their serial killer that the media and Carcetti all need. And the fact that this guy, we've gotten to know him as well, it all feels very, very tightly plotted, really. I think everything is slotting sort of so nicely together. And it does make me consider concerns from some people that the story ends quite cleanly in this show, and unambiguously. It's not all unambiguous, but I think there's still a lot of ambiguity with some characters. But it does make you realise how expertly planned out everything that came before it was. This is a really, really nice example of everything slotting into place and not one strand really being left unfinished. Everything is completely resolved, which is very satisfying.
It is certainly an achievement to have all of these very complex little stories that, although they have been intertwined in their own little ways, they've managed to find one great big story to involve them all. And to also bring around a lot of closure for these stories as well. So it's certainly a feat of writing to bring all of these characters and institutions around in such a way that they reach a certain completion point, courtesy of the serial killer thing. McNulty, fortunately, is good enough to find out about this business card fellow and bring him back to the station. As we anticipate, he is, not entirely all there, as he claims that he's killed millions.
Yep.
So it's just a bit sad to see this guy in quite a state, and that's who they're going to end up sort of unofficially pinning it all on and moving themselves on from the mess.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And then they bring in this guy to the interrogation, which sort of is very fruitful by virtue of this guy's sort of issues, I guess, and it's then interrupted by Templeton, as we mentioned, who comes in looking to yet again desperately bank on this story. Got to get in and find a new angle here. This is also his last attempt, thankfully.
He could at least come up with a new story to lie about.
Yeah, it's just absolutely ridiculous, really.
Running out of options here.
So he wants to make a sort of testify based on a witness call card, and very, very nice to see McNulty come in here and slam Templeton. And ironically, McNulty gives Templeton the story of the decade right here. He tells him everything that's happened. He reveals all the deception that he wasn't privy to on his side of the story. Yet he can't actually use it because he would have to incriminate himself in doing so.
Yeah.
Which is pretty fantastic, and McNulty makes it as clear as that to him.
Yeah, it's interesting that McNulty still gives him a couple of lies to Scott just to cover himself, because he lies about the guy that he kidnapped, saying, "No, he's my second cousin, and we sent him to Atlantic City with a roll of quarters," or something like that. Obviously not prepared to openly admit that he did abduct a homeless guy and send him far away in order to justify him, although even if he does admit to taking the pictures.
Yeah.
And yeah, this really is just helping to reinforce the differences between the two of them, although McNulty admits that both of them have definitely been very, very fraudulent over the last year or so. It's key that Scott's reasoning really is just very selfish. I think despite everything, McNulty still has a reasonably noble goal. He wants to catch Marlo Stanfield, whereas Scott's reasoning has always been very poor and just been about trying to elevate himself to some better position, receiving some recognition for genius that he supposedly deserves. McNulty is the same, but it's also agreed upon that he's a very, very competent policeman and very competent detective nonetheless, whereas we don't see any of that with Templeton. And in this scene, it feels like what McNulty is saying is directly a criticism of his character as well. Why did you do it? Yeah. Why, I don't understand that there are not enough depths to your character for me to really make sense of why you have done this.
Yeah, and it's the same for everyone, not just McNulty. It's dumbfounding.
Yeah.
Definitely. But nonetheless, a satisfying send-off for the guy. Good scene. And it's interesting how he sort of seems to connect to Templeton on one level as well, because they are trapped in the same lie. He says that to him, and yet he hates his guts on another level completely, so that there is this sort of conflict going on. That's also why he didn't sort of turn him in, I guess, earlier on. And we see how this episode is actually doing a lot to win back McNulty as a likable character in the final 90 minutes. He's got a real victory as far as finding the copycat murderer so quickly, finally being able to jump out of his lie at this point. Also, his distaste for Templeton at this point makes him very heroic, sort of an audience surrogate, even if just for a minute or two. And then we'll get to your the second showdown with Rules and Daniels, when he refuses to charge the guy for more than he's done for all the murders. Again, sort of sticking to that complete moral code, and he has in some ways. Lots of things that are really building him back up in everyone's good books. For a not a completely morally unambiguous finish, but at least for something that's sort of meant to be positive, I think, definitely.
Yeah, McNulty is showing a little bit of contrition, if he can, because due to his realizations, he doesn't want to be seen completely as this bad guy. I think it's quite important that he's not willing to put these charges on this guy who hasn't done them, just for the sake of wrapping up their case with the serial killer nice and neatly. I mean, it feels like he's he's not prepared to entirely throw away his own guilt. He wants to. He's not prepared to actually put himself in prison. He's not prepared to openly admit everything that's going on, like he does with Scott. But he's also not prepared to entirely throw away what made him so complicit in the first place. So it's nice that we see him making a little bit of an effort for a future self here. It's nice that the word there is this like the word lie briefly appears next to rules as like a sticker on the homicide desk partition.
That's cool.
I don't know if there's any significance to when it appears, but yeah, there's like a sticker on the wall there. It just says lie, and it appears very briefly stuck to the wall as we see Rawls getting very angry at McNulty for being insubordinate yet again at a time that maybe he, or certainly Rawls, feels is not appropriate.
Yeah. I mean, McNulty's just never going to bow to those bosses. That's one thing that he's always been sure of.
Yeah, he's got to do what he wants to do.
Yeah. And many scenes in this section, actually. We then go to the bit with Perlman. Yet another Perlman scene where she is talking the detectives through their legal rights going forward and what they can and can't have done to them, which includes not being able to be fired. You're right, they can't fire you, she says. And I like how they cut straight to that from Daniel was sort of refusing to become the commissioner a bit later on, or at least play by their rules as commissioner. So McNulty and Freeman are told about their careers, and yet all they can think about is Marlo walking. They're incredibly selfless in some ways. They're told that that we're going to completely overhaul your lives here. You're never going to be able to do satisfying police work again. You may want to retire. All we're hearing is that Marlo is walking, and you can't blame. They're really dedicated to their craft, I guess.
They want to make it all worth it. They want to be certain, at the very least, that they can feel confident that everything they did to get Marlo behind bars. And now it feels like, despite everything, that's not going to be happening. They've made some real advances. They've certainly damaged the Stanfield organisation irrevocably, but the one thing they really wanted was Marlo behind bars, and it looks like that's just not going to happen. And it really is all that they can think about at this stage.
Yeah. And then we get to the point where Freeman. This leaves a bit of a sour taste in the mouth, actually, to be honest. But Freeman does challenge Perlman quite directly over the whole deal she made with Levy.
Yeah.
And as you were saying, this is all about making what they've done count and actually amount to something that's worth it. And I guess McNulty and Freeman at least need the peace of knowing it was worth it. And you can see why Freeman does it. It does make you wonder whether Freeman would have wanted to do the job himself and do a better job of it. But Perlman is a really well-established lawyer, and I don't think he would have been able to quote all those sort of various cases. Perhaps he would have done. I mean, he seems to be a jack of all trades, Freeman, but it is a little bit. It's just such a challenge of authority, really, considering what situation they've just been put through.
It comes across as a tad ungrateful.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay, what's next?
All right, so we've got our second politics strand, very short section even. So in a press conference afterwards, Mayor Carcetti takes a great deal of credit for both the toppling of the Stanfield enterprise and the catching of the Red Ribbon Killer. Immediately afterwards, he promotes Daniels to commissioner, with Rawls serving as an advisor at City Hall.
Daniel's having trouble hiding his disappointment at this big press conference.
Yeah.
As it's all just being swept under the rug, so he's having to give up the idea of things really being taken to task and having a big clean out of all the corrupted individuals. I think realistically there might not be many people left over if they were going to try and get rid of anyone who had any kind of involvement with it. But it's certainly not going to be getting much of that, and thus he has to kind of stand and applaud as he's being told that he's on his way to that commissioner's chair, which I guess makes it not all bad news. Well, not at this stage, anyway.
I mean, he's been getting so many promotions recently that he's probably getting a little bit bored of them and increasingly sceptical of what actually it means for him professionally, as we see. very
I
quickly.
guess that's what happens if it happens too often. Is when you're working for years and years to get your next promotion, you kind of understand the work that's gone into getting there.
Yeah.
And then it just becomes a bit of a game to put something new, some fancy new tag on your collar or whatever, and it doesn't seem to mean a whole lot to him now.
Yeah.
He kind of sees the lie for what it is.
Definitely, yeah. Yeah, so I guess the final press conference for Carcetti, and as you were saying, they've doctored it as far as possible. It's still kind of within the realms of that they can't be tripped up legally on what they've said, but it is very heavily doctored. And yeah, two huge elements of the show, the vacant murders of season 4 and the homeless murder of season 5, case closed, and Daniel's getting all the credit for that, really. Carcetti throwing it on Daniels there. And of course using that as the leaping point for the promotion, and we get that circle of life moment with Daniels and Rules on the up as per their agreements previously. And yeah, Carcetti has certainly saved his governor campaign here. He's really got unlucky because he's not really been responsible for any of it. It's just been sort of fate playing around him, I guess, or various actions of everyone finally falling in his favour at this point.
Though this is starting to feel like, obviously, less and less good news for the people of Baltimore, who are unlikely to see much benefit from that in the future.
Yeah. Yeah, none of it actually has a bearing on the improvement in the city, as you say. Yeah, definitely. Okay. Our second and final Stanfield organisation section. So, Levy visits Marlo in custody to inform him of the final fates of the crew. Unbeknownst to Marlo, Levy reveals to the audience that he has given in to Perlman's blackmail. Marlo, now prepared to give up the crown, meets with the remaining members of the New Day Co-op to negotiate a price to sell his drug supply connection to the Greek after his release from prison. He names the price at $10 million, which the Co-op members can attempt to raise between them. The group agrees that this price beats their only alternative, which is to resume selling low-quality drugs from New York. Later, the group meets in a parking lot where Ricardo reminisces about the old days under Proposition Joe's leadership, which causes Cheese, who's Prop Joe's nephew, of course, to pull a gun on him. Cheese acknowledges his role in his uncle's death and is promptly shot in the head by Slim Charles, though Clinton complains that Cheese was going to contribute funds. Charles maintains that it was for Joe. They all depart, leaving Cheese's body behind.
Okay, so Marlo, now realising that what a situation that he's in now, all of that hard work is going to have to pretty much disappear. He's going to have to move the Connect on, but he gets to keep his money, so he's going to, at the very least, try and make a shit ton of money with his supplier right at the very end. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting when he has that other chat with Levy. He very much accepts it. And is sort of resigned to it as a final verdict. It seems quite appreciative of Levy's efforts. And yeah, he sort of just says, let's give up the crown, which is interesting to hear. And, it's quite a bummer that he gets to hang on to all of those riches. Freeman particularly thought that she could have thrown that into the negotiation, that he has to give up his drug money. But of course, offshore bank accounts, etc., I'm sure it's all sort of sitting there, very hard to reach. But yeah, it's just part of that characteristic unjust conclusion that The Wire always seems to bring. And interesting.
We can only assume that he trusts quite implicitly in Levy's counsel.
Yeah. He certainly believes that he is the best, and he can see. I guess he's so impressed by his understanding of the situation, as we are, that I guess you have to sort of take it as gospel. And I also like, unusually as well, Marlo expresses a lot of concern here for his lieutenants, particularly for Chris, sort of actually conveying empathy for the first time in the show. Hard to know if it's genuine. I mean, I'd hope it is. But he utters that he'll take care of Chris's people to Levy, and seems pretty bummed out that he's getting a sort of life sentence without parole.
Well, I guess there is at least a small amount of compassion to the man, although maybe compassion is the wrong word. He has a certain loyalty to the people that he's worked with.
Yeah.
Especially someone like Chris, who has been so important to him having been elevated at all in the drug world.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's interesting that he does give things up here, presumably due to how much he trusts the information that he's been given. And like you say, we get a little bit of uncharacteristic reflection at the end here from Marlo. I guess he's clearly not accustomed to being in this situation behind bars. Maybe that's given them a little bit of a unique perspective.
Yeah, I like the fact that most of this scene is seen from the wide-angled mirror in the top. They sort of seem to focus on that point quite a lot. Also means that we can see Herc is also in the background listening in. Marlo's very happy to spill all the beans to his previous arch nemesis, whose camera he stole. So I guess the allegiances have shifted.
Certainly small time compared to now.
Yeah, definitely. And then speaking of Herc, this is also a Herc moment where he is obviously given that huge congratulations from Levy on finding out about the illegal wiretap. I guess that's the only thing he's actually really done here. Or was it also because he stole the number in the first place and dangled the bait in front of the cops? That's probably a bit of a stretch, but that's interesting to consider. It feels a little bit disingenuous, the congratulations. It feels a little bit sort of forced. I'm not sure if he's really that pleased with him, but I guess he's sort of trying to encourage him, and Yvette's making brisket, which is a line he also used in Season 1, Episode 2, right at the start of the show, when he was called away from his brisket dinner to spring D'Angelo from the police department.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, he certainly seems very pleased with him here. Herc has found himself a life that he's quite content with, allowed to make himself useful. He feels respected. That was a problem that he always had when he was working before, so I guess Levy knows how to treat him right and understands him as a valuable source. And he does have this slightly strange position between the police and someone like Levy, that he is genuinely valuable.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think he tells him, you're a sporker now. There's some sort of Yiddish terminology, but he, we haven't seen much of Herc this season, but you can imagine that this is one of the worst things for him to hear. Such encouragement, which is similar to when he made the sergeant promotion. It was the wrong level of encouragement for someone with his skill set, and it led to some major damage. So perhaps he is going to cause some crap for Levy down the line, or perhaps Levy is such a good influence on him that he's actually going to sharpen him up and whip him into shape, and he'll become a very esteemed attorney's assistant. But we'll have to see.
Yeah, he's found something that he can do more in than just make a load of noise.
Yeah. He's found something he's got to use his brain a little bit for. And so that was that. And then we get to the bit with the co-op, I guess, the co-op follow-up. And he sets his price as 10 mil for the co-op connection to the Greeks. Which is in addition to the fortunes he's getting to keep anyway, that he's already made, that they couldn't seize off him as part of the negotiation.
Yeah, he's not going to be short of a bob or two.
Yeah, oh yeah. And pretty brutal, I guess, brutal pricing strategy, but he is the ultimate monopoly. There's no one else in the market, and he's maintaining his pride by saying he's bored and is moving on to bigger and better things. All of a sudden, he's sort of considering this Stringer Bell trajectory, saying he's going to go be a businessman. And with all his laundered money in the bank accounts overseas, perhaps he is able to achieve this. But we see a little bit more of that later on.
Yeah, it doesn't come across as too genuine, I don't think.
No.
He knows that he's able to make a little bit of money out of this particular moment for himself. And yeah, certainly not going to be short of a rather nice retirement, such as it is.
And then we have the final section of this Stanfield bit, which is where they sort of meet to gather their finances, or the co-op boys. And Cheese looking to enter far more than his fair share of 900k. And he's telling everyone that they should be ashamed if they don't have that kind of cash already. And it's pretty clear that he's going to do a bad job of being, I guess, a poor man's Marlo, the leader, if he sticks around for this gig. So it does make sense that Slim pops him. He's already demonstrated the extent of his loyalty before. So he's not a big loss, even if in the short term he was going to provide a nice source of cash for them. I think it's a very good call on Slim's part to just knock him out there.
Yeah, I mean, one thing we have learned about a lot of these people in the co-op is that they obviously respect that kind of loyalty and assistance between one another. There is a certain honour among thieves, if you like, between them.
Yeah.
And someone like Cheese, who has been introduced courtesy of Prop Joe and given more influence courtesy of Marlo, is not exactly a savoury character to their group. So, despite the fact that they've lost a load of money in there that Clinton is complaining about, I think generally speaking, he's not a very popular character amongst the other members of the co-op. So, Slim makes a move that is ultimately a good one for everyone involved.
Yeah. They never explain how they raised the extra cash, but we assume that they're all pretty wealthy dealers.
It's also mentioned that they have some kind of New York connect that they can live off for the time being.
Yeah, okay, that's true. So you just got to make a few more on the side and bring it down. And this final moment for Cheese is really good. I like that he echoes Snoop's points from last week about Deserve having nothing to do with death, and that the game operates, I guess, in arbitrary periods where people serve their time as king and then they move on, or they are dealt with and someone else takes their place. It's kind of the idea of don't blame it on the player, blame it on the game. And yeah, just this sort of battle between the old guard and the new guard, the new fierce ways that Marlo instilled in some people, much like the paper, in terms of their squabbles over the way to approach the work, and all the other institutions for that matter. But yeah, Slim puts a very, very satisfying end to his sort of Marlo-esque duplicity. That was for Joe.
Yeah. It makes sense that Slim's last act that we see is an honourable one.
Yeah, and then I like that Clinton sort of chastises him because it was a sentimental move. You says that sentiment is not allowed here. This sentimental motherfucker cost us money.
Yeah. Well, he's just reintroducing it a little bit after it's been sucked out so badly by Marlo.
Yeah. And Cheese still moves on the floor for a little bit, which I quite like. He's sort of twitching in the fingers.
Yeah. Yeah, he's not. I guess he always had to have a slightly kind of comedy element to him. That's just Method Man all over, I suppose.
There's no back in the day. There's no nostalgia. All right. Okay. Let's go to our final homicide, section 4. The BPD hold a mock wake for McNulty, as has been the tradition for detectives who died before their retirement. Freeman, who has enough time to take full retirement, attends with his wife Shardine in tow. Several officers, including McNulty's Sergeant J. Landsman, expressed genuine dismay at his permanent departure from the homicide department, acknowledging that McNulty was a real murder police, and the best detective in the department in spite of, or possibly because of, his character flaws. McNulty and Freeman make amends with Kima, who admits that she informed Daniels of their lies, with McNulty acknowledging that if she felt she had no other recourse, he trusted her judgment to do the right thing. McNulty heads home to his girlfriend Beadie Russell, with whom he seems to have reconciled.
Okay, so we start off with a sort of genuine feel-good finale moment, which I think we are due, given the relentless seriousness of everything else through the rest of this episode, so far anyway.
Yeah.
So we do get a bit of a nice feel-good moment here in what is, I suppose, an acknowledgement of McNulty, which is the closest that the show has had to a sort of main character, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Very emotional. I have heard some criticism that this scene doesn't ring true, considering the gravity of what McNulty has just done and what everyone's just found out. Even if it is kind of mostly ironic what they're saying here, it's still a somewhat sort of unjustified celebration. Particularly when you can think about how Bunk's relationship was completely overhauled by this that he did. I think that's perhaps a harsh criticism, but I can see where they're coming from. In isolation, this scene is really good, and I really like the sort of emotional, sort of genuine element to it. As this sort of legend of the office, I guess, a detective that you'll never be able to forget because he's just so insubordinate and like kind of hilariously self-destructive in some ways.
Yeah, I do feel that once they feel like these cases have gone down and they've moved on and the whole issue has been left to be dealt with by those further up by them, that everyone seems to relax somewhat and focus on the fact that McNulty is going, and like you say, the the fact that he is going is just too big a deal to ignore.
Yeah.
He's too much of a recognised character within the police department, so he doesn't get away scot-free in terms of his friends and colleagues.
Definitely.
And a lot of it is obviously very, very ironic, which works very nicely as a slightly disarming comedic moment.
Although it's quite nice to see Landsman sort of genuinely choke at one point. Don't know if it's for real. Kind of looks like it. So yeah, sort of the closest the show is coming to sentimentality, but completely deserved. Having all these major sort of characters that we've gotten to know sort of really adds to the emotional crux of it all. I think even Sidner and Amanda Reese from the FBI are showing up here in certain scenes. And Sidner sort of unexplainably having completely evaded the consequences and involvement in this episode. He's sort of just been at the sidelines, and they must have overlooked the fact that he was actually complicit to the whole thing.
Well, I guess nobody has gone along and said that he was involved, so he's managed to slip by somehow.
Perhaps they just said that they never told him that it was all like sort of a fake wiretap. But
did Greggs ever know that he was involved? I don't think she ever caught him.
Because she came in last week, didn't she? And she stormed back out saying, "I ain't cool with it, Sidner."
Oh right.
Yeah. So
I suppose Sidner is involved. I don't know, for whatever reason he's just not been collared.
Even Daniels and Perlman at the end of last episode said, McNulty, Freeman, even Sidner. Everyone has mentioned that he was obviously on the paper as part of that case, but perhaps they just did say, look, Sidner didn't actually know about this. He's just on the investigation as a dummy.
In whatever conversations that we didn't see, perhaps also Freeman and McNulty had said, Sidner really did just kind of come along for the ride. We were the masterminds.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's it's cool. It's cool to see him again. You always forget that he exists because the show sort of totally goes off him, despite the fact they were building him up as a sort of a bigger character last week, and makes it a bit weird when he's finally shown at the end doing the McNulty thing. It's a bit weird.
It's a connection to sort of future characters as replacements for ones that we've already seen. It's one of the least cohesive ones, certainly.
Yeah.
At one point, it's like Greggs is the next McNulty, and then Sidner's the next McNulty, and it's not really.
Yeah.
Neither is particularly well done.
Yeah, because there's that scene at the low-rise, isn't there, where there's a new body, and they sort of rehash the giving a fuck when it ain't your turn, suggesting that Greggs is the new McNulty, and then they follow that up a bit more directly with the Sidner scene, which is a very obvious reference back to the first episode. So,
that scene as well, where they're outside doing that investigation, has got to be a nod to season one as well, because it looks very similar to where they were with William Gant.
Yeah, I think William Gant was shot like a few meters to the right or whatever. Like it was literally the same spot. So,
and it's like Bunk and his new partner.
Yeah. And the fact that Kima, it was actually Bunk's turn, but Kima sort of stepped in and because she was bored and wanted to give a fuck when it wasn't her turn. So, it sort of ticks a lot of wire boxes for sort of the new generation, anyway.
Yeah.
Back to the wake, we then have Freeman making a big entrance with Chardine, and he's done 34 years and 4 months, as Chardine adds the whole month thing. It seems to be Freeman's catchphrase to get very pedantic over the months. Pretty cool. And McNulty's only done something like 9 years, or possibly 30. I think it's only 9 years. So you really realise sort of the difference in experience these guys have got, and in terms of how long they've actually been police for.
Yeah.
Can only imagine how good McNulty will get if he reaches year 34 on the force.
Well, seeing as he's not going to be doing any more investigative work.
Yeah.
And I don't think we'll ever get to see how good he could have been if he was just able to restrain himself that little bit more.
Definitely, yeah. So just have that. We have the final rendition of the Body of an American from the Pogues. Always really fun to see. And then Greggs comes by later on to drop her secret off. And I completely agree with concerns that this is a little bit rushed. And clearly neither Freeman or McNulty had cottoned on. They're very surprised. And as I was saying, there's a fairly sincere reconciliation from Freeman, although McNulty's is also sort of, in terms of the content of what he says, is also warm, but I think there is a bit more of a cold shoulder approach in it because he sort of walks off right afterwards. And I kind of hope there is, because I think it's a very simple way to resolve that if they're both just happy with it. It makes more sense to really have her give Greg's more of a sour end and not have her caught up in the sentiment of this moment for the rest of them.
I do feel that at this point, McNulty probably accepts that he's not really meant to be police. He's not, he's destined not to do that. Whether by the fact that it's, said to him that he's not going to be doing any more investigative work, I think he also personally accepts that that's not what he needs to be doing. It's clearly bad for him. So I think maybe at this point he probably does accept it anyway. So the involvement of Greg's in having essentially expelled him from that position, giving away the whole plot, I think he just maybe doesn't care enough anymore. And the whole scene is given a bit of a rushed, slightly throwaway vibe by the fact that everyone's drinking as well. So they're probably not thinking too clearly about it either.
Yeah.
So it is, it is somewhat, there, and then we move along. Greg's just kind of says it had to be done, and then there's a little moment of reconciliation, and then that's it. We move on.
Yeah, it did certainly warranted a little bit more discussion. There'd be a lot of moral issues to sort of open up there, because I do like the idea that she is too principled. That was sort of principled to the point of disloyalty to friends, and it's an interesting sort of topic to just sort of chat about. But yeah, I guess you can't include everything. So a bit of a sour end for Greg's, I guess. It's nice that not everyone's ending that conclusively. Greg's is a little bit of a interesting ending, and she left the show actually with more integrity intact than most people. So it's still quite an important end point for her. I like how McNulty starts giving back to the homeless as he walks off past the bar as well, as he shoves a penny into the pot, and we're assuming he's walking off back to BD, cutting his drinking short, starting his sort of repentance or New Year's resolution or whatever. And then we get our final scene at the stoop hangout, where it's just the two of them and no words are exchanged, and I guess we make of it what we will.
Yeah, I think we've already said how we've got the impression from BD as being a character who probably doesn't want to get rid of that kind of solidarity and companionship and whatnot if she can help it, because she's got these two kids and she's been painted as a somewhat lonely woman anyway. So with McNulty showing a desire to come home and do right by her and do right by himself, more importantly, is it's a encouraging look out for their relationship, and that's about all we can see from it.
Yeah.
I think you're right. I mean, I don't think Amy Ryan has any lines in this episode other than a couple of little bits. It's not really like any significant conversations about their relationship like we had before. And certainly here, neither of them say anything.
Yeah, definitely, yeah. They've got the full moon down on them. They've got the, a lucky McNulty who seems to have managed to get BD back quite easy. I'm sure he's shown his fair share of remorse, but there might not be as much of a trial as he might have expected.
I think it's a similar situation with Bubbles, though. Although he has made this step, there's still a long way to go yet before there's any kind of genuine, full relationship as normal.
Yeah, I think it would be
much like Bubbles with his sister.
Definitely right, yeah. So let's hope he's able to stay in season 4 mode without any of these cases to work. Perhaps it will do him the right thing, or maybe he'll just get frustrated with the lack of any potential enjoyable work that sort of satisfies his intelligence.
Depends how far he gets bumped down, I guess. I dare say he won't have much choice.
Yeah, maybe. We'll have to see. Okay. Right. Final politics section. So, shortly afterwards, Commissioner Daniels is told by Major Carcetti's Chief of Staff, Steintorf, to manipulate the crime stats to make it appear crime is dropping during the next 2 quarters, an order which he flatly refuses. Daniels, fed up with the numbers game, which he says caused the problems in the department in the first place, states from now on all of his stats will be clean, and real police work will resume. Steintorf is then told by City Council President Nerese Campbell that Daniels will duke the stats or resign as commissioner. Campbell sends Daniels' ex-wife, 11th District Councilwoman Marla Daniels, to him with the file threatening Daniels over his days as an Eastern District DU sergeant. Daniels then agrees to step down for personal reasons and decides to make use of his law degree. His last act before departing is to award promotions within the department, amongst them being Ellis Carver's promotion to lieutenant. Carver appears to be lieutenant of the Major Crimes Unit, the position Daniels held at the start of the series.
So Steintorf trying to push that stats game once again, the Carcetti administration position being very clear, which is a massive disappointment for Daniels. Once again, just reminding it of this promise that was essentially made to him, and he's gonna stick by it, even if Carcetti is not. But unfortunately, he's found himself in a position where he's not able to make those kind of demands, and is essentially muscles out of it. And Daniels ends up having a very similar conversation with Marla to the one that he has with Rhonda, where if he's going to stand up to these principles and is really going to stay there because they're not necessarily able to fire him, then it's going to end up hurting Marla and others as well through through them being complicit to it. Yeah,
definitely. It's nice that he very much reestablishes that philosophy that he learnt during season 1 and has stuck with ever since. And he sort of rehashes it in the most articulate way he's done so far, and really sort of makes a big point that the show had put forward as one of its most important. And yeah, just the fact that Marlo would suffer from it as well gives a lot of stakes to both of them. And I like how it does offer a little bit of closure on their relationship during the first 2 seasons. And we see that they were once much better suited for each other when they were both careerists, but now Marla, who encourages him to play all the politics cards he has, sort of is cut from a different jib. It's interesting that this this clear divide in their relationship is still apparent. She doesn't disagree with his points about the work needing to be honest, but she believes the system is too broken to bother being the one guy who tries to fix it, which is a very reasonable point of view. But Ben,
it is valid, yeah.
Yeah.
I think Daniels just doesn't want to be the kind of person who's going to continue perpetuating that kind of issue. He wants to be someone who's going to actually make a difference.
Yeah.
So it's fair enough that he's not willing to do the whole bending no matter what.
Definitely, yeah. You're already broken.
Exactly.
And I guess it's nice that they also pay off quite a small segment with Nerys, where Nerys obviously got hold of the dodgy file that she saw when Burrell was forced to play that card when he was being outed. So nice that they paid that one off with Nerys being able to use it now, even if Carcetti himself wouldn't actually be able to fire him, that they have found leverage from somewhere.
Yeah, it's never been made 100% clear exactly how deadly this information is. Obviously, we don't know. We know a kind of we get a general idea of what it was. We don't get any of the details, but it's never made precisely clear how much of an impact it would have on his career if it was made available, depending on who it was made available to. It's a very ambiguous situation, but clearly it's enough to. It's a situation that Daniels knows that he might be able to get through, but it's not necessarily one that he wants to have to put up with, especially given the kind of stance that he wants to have on his role as commissioner. He doesn't want to have the kind of term that is going to involve the same political maneuverings and stat games. He knows what kind of term he wants to have if he's going to be a commissioner, and if it's going to be like that, then he might as well not be doing it at all, because that's not what he stepped into the role to do.
Yeah.
So I think he's just willing to accept it as maybe it's time to just admit that he's not going to be right for this role and go and do something else. And actually be happy about it.
I mean, again, I think it would help if Carcetti actually went to speak to him himself. He's just let Steintorf do all the talking for him now. But when Daniel says they're clean and they're going to stay clean, he's looking to get off on that right foot as he joins this job. I think if Carcetti were there instead of Steintorf, it would perhaps let him reflect on his humble beginnings, like Bunny made him do last episode. Obviously, with Steintorf having his mind set on one thing, there's no budging with him, but that is one possible sort of way he's further insulated himself from sort of the truth of of his job. All right. Just before we get to this section, actually, there's this really weird montage of city shots. So it depicts a couple of days passing, and we see a few institutions' headquarters. We see the Baltimore Sun, the police headquarters, the parts of the docks. We see lots of busy traffic shots. We then see a very sped up sunset and sunrise. Very unusual, I just sort of guess signifying that the final case is closed, and we're now a little way ahead, and we're just going to close the case up for the last half hour. We're just going to close the characters' arcs up. Yeah.
Yeah, it shows. I mean, it shows some days passing, so we get the idea of obviously a bit of time compression going on, which is useful for the way it wants to move its stories, considering that the next thing that we see is Daniels in this position as commissioner, essentially. So we're moving a bit of time onwards.
Yeah.
But it's also nice to get all this sort of ambience of the city, if you will, and it helps reinforce what the show has always been about, which is about the city of Baltimore itself, and makes it seem like we're looking at a city that, especially when we get to this at the end, it really does seem like a city that, despite all of its problems, you just come to realise everything that's going on that's around all of these issues and around all of these political movements and around all of these institutions, and that there are a lot of people living and working here that are just going about their lives, and it's just nice to see a bit of consideration for that as well as all the drama.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Yeah, it's a very unusual sort of situation, and the show breaking its rules in terms of just depicting things linearly. We get some serious fast motion.
Nice to just have a sort of musicless montage, I suppose.
Yeah.
As well.
Yeah, it's quite nice. It's very atmospheric. And then we also mentioned, obviously, the bit right at the end where Carver gets his promotion. He has his moment. Another sort of full circle moment, really. Quite like Daniels' line, I guess I've got some kids somewhere I don't even know about, as it's clear that the family reasons are out on the sort of public domain now. And there's just a lot of tenderness to all of these last few scenes across the institutions, and this sort of theme of farewell throughout the last half hour. It's played nicely, but not sort of overly underlined at any point, really. I know that some feel that it kind of betrayed the Wire's lack of sentimentality that otherwise it maintained. For example, they sort of say, do we need to see Herc and Carver embracing to remind us of their old days nostalgia? Or do we need to see Bunk and Kima solving William Gant 2.0 whilst rehashing old Season 1 lines? It's sort of stuff like that. I think that's very cynical. There's nothing about the final season I don't think that sort of wouldn't be plausible as part of the story. I mean, the Bunk and Greg's thing being so similar to William Gant is a little bit of a stretch, but I'm a sucker for the nostalgia of all of it. I do enjoy it.
I mean, it does come from the fact that you expect finales to have a certain indulgence and a certain amount of fan service. You expect them to really embrace what they are and really provide a certain amount of closure and make us feel good about the journey that we've gone through. And I suppose some expect from a show like The Wire, which defies a lot of those typified TV tropes, to break that rule and to not show any sentimentality and to just bring us essentially just a last episode. But I do agree. I don't like to be too cynical about it. It is the last episode. There's more than enough tragedy and hardship and ambiguity about futures and all of that to go around. There's more than enough of it to go around for the finale. And having been through so much throughout this season and throughout the previous 4 seasons, I think it's. I don't think it's totally unreasonable for the show to enjoy a few moments of sentimentality. They are definitely few and far between. There's no doubting. No doubting it.
Definitely. All right, so
I don't feel like it goes overboard, certainly.
Oh yeah. I think it's perfectly balanced with the cold, harsh reality endings for a lot of these characters, which are just as tragic as the rest of the show has been. I guess that brings us to our closing montage. We've gone through all the sections. So, shall I quickly mention each element, and we'll just very briefly just say a couple of words on it, I guess, shall we? Sort of, because
yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, all right. So, as the show winds to a conclusion, several cutaways show the fates of many of the major characters as the show's conclusion, many of which establish that the next generation has simply begun following the same path the main characters followed in the past 5 seasons. So, in fact, the first few are not actually in the montage; they occur as part of the show earlier. So the first one is Kima catches Bunk's turn in the rotation, as she's in need of overtime at a murder in the low rises.
Yeah, so we briefly discussed this one, it being very much a nod to the first episode with William Gant, it having been a moment closely, haven't happened very closely to it, geographically speaking, and it's a nice nod to the fact that Bunk is working with a new partner, and we have someone giving a fuck when it ain't their turn, which is one of the very first things that we learnt in the very first episode.
Yeah.
So just a sort of a nod to bring it all back.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's makes sense that their relationship isn't tainted. I'm glad that Kima and Bunk, they were obviously in it together on the whole serial killer thing, and if anything, they'll have grown stronger together through it, I imagine. It makes sense that they'll be sort of partners next.
They still got to work together after all.
Yep, definitely. And yeah, it's nice that is. I think that's a good McNulty call forward, really, on Kima's part, not giving a fuck when it is in her turn. As much as I like to have Sydney have a final moment, that one that comes afterwards doesn't really feel genuine. And we'll go to that next. So Detective Leander Sidner approaches Judge Daniel Phelan to complain about the Commissioner's incompetence, mirroring the diatribe from McNulty, which began the first Barksdale investigation in Season 1.
So yeah, as you say, this is another one bringing us full circle, trying to perhaps suggest that Sidner has the same kind of McNulty streak, and just reminding us of that incident from the Target. It doesn't... I mean, it feels a bit too late. It feels a little bit too little... far too late in the game to really cement anything that feels like Sidner as a new generation McNulty. The whole idea of that has been floated about, but it just doesn't really sink in for me, and this doesn't really help much.
Yeah.
But I guess it's nice to see Sidner one last time. He's always been at least somewhat active. He's always been very competent, so he's doing something interesting here, and it's good to see him one last time. But I certainly don't buy this as an indication of his McNultiness. Yeah.
I mean, it'd be interesting to consider whether, if they put Kima in Sidner's shoes in this scene, would it make sense? I mean, it probably wouldn't, because she's not enough of a rogue.
Certainly not enough of a rogue, so given what we've seen.
Exactly. So, I mean, it's tricky. It's tricky. Yeah. All right, so that's the one that doesn't really quite work. Let's move on to the next one. The next one is the least conclusive, and we've already discussed it a bit. So it's Marlo, attending a party held by friends of Maury Levy, attempts to blend in and become a legitimate businessman, much like Stringer. Uncomfortable in such surroundings, he departs quickly and moves to the nearby corner, accosting 2 gang members. Despite the 2 being armed with a gun and a switchblade, Marlo beats them soundly and stands triumphantly on their corner. The 2, however, have no idea who Marlo is, and are telling stories about Omar when Marlo meets them. Marlo has lost the one thing he cares about, his street cred. Sorry, that was a little bit too opinionated for a recap there, but what do you make of it?
So, Marlo obviously very uncomfortable in this kind of situation. It's interesting that it's interesting that Levy essentially gives him what Stringer always wanted. He ends up in this situation with all these powerful people, and Stringer would have been right at home, but that's not what Marlo wants at all. And so he gets out of there as quickly as possible. He's always been quick to do exactly what he wants first and foremost. Tries to start a bit of a thing with these guys, don't you know who I am? We do see that although he may have been absent from the corner, he is still capable of taking care of himself. I mean, there are 2 of those guys and they're both armed. So he is still capable of sorting out matters on the street physically if needs be. I like that it's a little bit creepy, but I like that he literally tastes his blood. He literally kind of wants a literal taste of the street again, a taste of that violence, which he goes out to get, but ultimately comes to realise that his credibility may have taken a bit of a hit. He's certainly not going to be increasing it too much after this. It is ambiguous as to whether or not he will be throwing himself back into the game. I mean, that really isn't clear. Certainly, what we can tell from this is that he wants to go out and get one taste from it until perhaps he does commit himself to some kind of business life, albeit one not quite as intense as maybe what Levy has planned for him. And we learn that the legend of Omar only continues to grow. I can't remember exactly what these guys are talking about, but it seems like the stories about Omar that we hear seem to get grander and grander every time we hear them. So you can kind of be rest assured that no matter how mundane and unfortunate and kind of frustrating his death may have been, in death, the stories about him just continue to be very fancy indeed.
Yeah, and with that comes the already forgot. Marlo's already forgotten, and I guess he needs to change that in his mind. So I guess his downfall was that he was so insulated from the street as the kingpin that he never actually amounted to much on the street. A lot of it was in his head, perhaps, it seems. So it's a pretty horrible realization for Marlo here when he comes down to the street and literally, begs them to remember him. Do you not know who I am?
Well, as we saw him, he started out as a prominent figure on the street that people saw and knew and feared, and then as he became more powerful, he just disappeared, and he had a name, but when people referred to him, it was just kind of, Marlo, Chris and Snoop and whoever, and, these are the people that are in charge, but we don't ever seem to see any of them.
Yeah.
All we know is that if you wrong them, you disappear. That's kind of about it, really, and that in itself is scary, but him as a character and him as a name, that starts to lose its individual uniqueness and significance to people, so I think that's what Marlo really values. He wants to be seen on the street.
Yeah, he needs to get back to his roots, eh? I think Omar really ruined that for him when he went on that rampage and really belittled him by, Marlo never sort of rising to his bait, and obviously not even being aware of it at the time. So overall, very good end, very interesting ending. I think there's no potential for him in business. The sort of satisfaction he's after is not here. And rather than fear, you have to sort of use charisma in this world to make deals and build relationships. And it's not what he wants. He wants to be feared rather than feel the vulnerability of being an absolute nobody in this room. And I guess he's also really scared by never being able to go back to the sort of security of the drug game. And we're sure he will. And that'll potentially get Jimmy and Freeman in the prison, and maybe Perlman for obstructing justice, if Levy wants to play that card as well. And then they would also hurt Carcetti and Daniels. There's also a lot in his hands at this point. So very interesting to consider where he's going to go from here.
Yeah, it's very, very hard to say. So I guess that all we can do is guess, really.
Yeah. All right, if we're done guessing, I'll go on to the next one. So a menacing Michael Lee and a partner kick in the door to Vincent's rim shop. Threatening him and his muscle with a shotgun, Michael demands the drug money the group is sorting, and when challenged, shoots Vincent in the kneecap. He and his partner depart with Michael's mannerisms and attitude mirroring those of the fallen Omar Little.
Okay, so bringing around another new generation here. I think Michael is a far more convincing Omar than, say, Sidner is a McNulty.
Yeah, definitely.
This is certainly a very solid connection that we've got here.
Yeah.
Got the right look. He's obviously smart enough. Vincent giving that, you're just a boy. That's something that we heard Omar say about Michael. He's just a kid. But this time, Michael actually has a response as he shoots him and tells him that's just his knee.
Yeah, that's right.
So we kind of get that witticism that we would expect from Omar as well.
Good point.
So
yeah.
there is a complete package that we get from Michael in this instance.
Yeah.
If you'll excuse the pun about packages.
Of course, yeah. And the whole just a boy thing echoing Omar's words for him in season 4, when he was sort of scoping him getting advice from Marlo about his stepdad, strengthening those connections. It's interesting that Michael just stays in Baltimore. At the end of last episode, looked like he was going to make a real run for it, and really sort of lay low as far away as possible, sort of do a Weebay in Philly, for example. But I guess what we've been shown is that these guys can't really escape, and he's going to stick around and just sort of have to live always on a knife's edge, to make it work. And thankfully, he's kind of cut out for that with the life that he's lived.
Yeah, it's a case of Baltimore being all that he's known, and he's probably not prepared to just disappear off to some other city. He's just going back to accept his fate, and he's probably aware that with the right skills, and if he's smart about it, he can probably survive and do quite well, and maybe even help do over a lot of these characters who have, that essentially use people like him.
Yep.
Now he wants to be the person using them.
Exactly, yeah. It's also the smart reason why he probably hasn't refriended Dookie or anything like that, because obviously any friends you have are your biggest weakness. They will become the bait. They will become the Butchie. They will become the Brandon. So you just got to be a complete loner or a lone wolf in this game now. Okay.
So that's Michael.
Yeah, that's Michael. Then the actual montage starts. So all of the stuff from here on out is actually under the original Blind Boys of Alabama theme. So we got Spider continuing to trade drugs as the boss on Michael's old corner. We get to see the mural that we mentioned last week up close. You get to see Bodie's names on there. I think Poot's name maybe as well. There's a few sort of old Barksdalers on there. And I guess Spider is now perhaps independent. And maybe our new Bodie, although he's certainly not worthy of replacing him, I don't think, as a character.
Yeah, Spider as a sort of influential person on the corner is neither here nor there, really. I mean, the fact that we got to know Spider a little bit better is the fact that we happened to get to know some of the extra people on the street, and we saw him involved with Cutty's gym and with Michael and whatever, but he's not exactly a thrilling character, so there's not too much to say about how one may feel about his rise through the ranks. He's just one of those that just happens to have survived, and thus he is there as the next generation. I can't imagine he's likely to rise up to any kind of kingpin status. He's never really showed any smarts to speak of.
Yeah.
So just sadly another teenager on the corner who is deeply, deeply entrenched in the game and will either end up dead or in prison, or and is unlikely to gain any major recognition.
Yeah, and Kennard tellingly absent. Of course, we find out what happens to him later on. Okay, so next we have Freeman appears to take up Dollhouse Miniatures as a full-time endeavour and is enjoying a happy retirement with Chardine.
Well, we spoke before about how Freeman has always said it's important, or specifically to McNulty anyway, that it's important to have stuff outside work. And this is something that he certainly, based on what he was telling Landsman about how much money he makes from it, there's a full-time job to be had in it. He certainly seems old enough to take his retirement. He's been in the force a long time. I'm sure he has made his money, and he's very happy being with Chardine, who is clearly very much in love with him. So Freeman gets very much a happy ending, which is you can't help but smile at. I mean, Freeman is a very endearing character. He's very wise. He's ended up doing something that he's passionate in, and he's been smart about his situation enough that leaving the force has not left him in some dark hole of depression or some great domestic situation that he's got to sort himself out with, like McNulty has. Instead, he's in a loving relationship with a great hobby turned full-time job, and you have to be very happy for the guy. He does deserve it.
Yeah, just absolutely a unambiguously good ending for him, and I still think there is an element of problem down the road if the shelved case does have to be reopened. Which has been promised if Marlo comes back to the street. But otherwise, just good on you, Freeman. You did good, and you came out unscathed.
Yeah.
Next we have Herc buying a round of drinks for his old Western boys, including Dozeman, Colicchio tellingly absent.
So Herc maintaining those connections in the Force. Obviously, I guess he kind of wants to be friends with these guys, but it's also important to his job and his role with Levy that he keeps the information flowing through him from the police department. Yep.
It's good to get sort of final nod to the Western District as well. They've been an important part of the show.
Absolutely.
And also the Western District way, which still pervades these power-hungry patrol boys, I guess, and this is where Herc still feels at home, really. This is what he doesn't want to miss out on. It's the banter that he's gotten, he's grown up with, really, I guess.
He still needs a certain amount of that camaraderie. He's always been into making a big show about it, so it makes sense that he would still be coming to have drinks with these guys, whilst it also helps serve this new job that he's got. Yeah, he's got a very sneaky link.
Okay, next up we have Scott Templeton winning a Pulitzer Prize for his work on the Red Ribbon Killer case, while Gus Haynes is demoted and Alma is transferred to a less prominent branch. Gus is able to smile, however, as he watches promising young protege Mike Fletcher step into the role of editor.
So I don't know if we ever really expected to see Scott actually be an award winner. I don't know if we ever really... I mean, I don't know enough about the Pulitzer Prize to know if this whole homeless thing really was good enough journalism for it to be prize-winning. But that's what we end up seeing. I don't know if Templeton is feeling any remorse about the situation given the dressing down that he got from McNulty. It seems here that he's not sort of massively overjoyed. He doesn't seem to be milking it too much, but he also doesn't seem to be, too troubled with the receipt either.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely is.
And then we're hearing about Fletcher basically stepping into this role of editor, which seems like a pretty good choice. He's clearly made himself out to be a good journalist. I do feel like there's a key point being made about the Sun here, somewhat quietly in the closing stages of the Baltimore Sun. And I think it's obviously very easy to argue that it hasn't been made very well throughout the season. And David Seaman himself talks about this in an interview. But the key with the Sun is supposedly not with what Scott was doing, but rather everything else that's not being done and all the stories that are not being reported on, and the times that we see stories being brought to Gus, for example, about Omar or Prop Joe and then being pushed down in favour of others. We come to realise at this point that everything we've seen as the viewer and that the residents of this fictional Baltimore are going to be largely none the wiser about everything that's happened unless they were directly involved. I mean, we have a lot of these myths that we hear about, but we don't necessarily get a lot of the lessons that could be learned from everything that's taken place. And, going right back to season 1, all of these instances in all these different institutions and the bodies on the street and the mistakes that have been made politically, because a lot of this is not being reported on in the way that some think that it should. Perhaps not a lot of these lessons are being made available to the public, and as a result, society may find it harder to change. And perhaps David Simon is making a point that this is what the news has the power to portray. This is what printed media has the ability to convey to its audience, and that by failing to cover these kind of stories with the detail that they deserve, instead the news becomes something else. It becomes just an entertainment medium.
Oh yeah, definitely. That's certainly, I think, Gus's view on the situation. And it does make for a pretty touching close. The stuff with Alma and Gus actually happens before the montage is spoken out. And yeah, it's pretty sad when we see Alma going, particularly when we hear of the secret that she did actually back Gus up in secret with the notepad. And the scene, I think, really makes you realise how the whole game got more fierce thing applies completely to this institution as well. As you were saying, sort of honesty and investigation is rejected, and I guess the ability to write entertaining prose is what's applauded, as you were saying. And they have this sort of sharing of mutual respect for their honest journalism, which is kind of nice, and exchanging some nice words, but they both seem to know deep down that they're lying to each other, that Alma won't be able to write her way out of the county-based newspaper that she's been demoted to, and Gus won't be editing for much longer at the Baltimore Sun. So you never know, perhaps Alma's paper is a very investigative paper, but it's also where we get our second, we get our epigraph, which is written a little bit like the Animal Trapped epigraph.
Yeah, it's just the two of them perhaps recognising that they are of a dying breed, and that no matter how good they are at what they're doing, it's what they're doing that's not going to get them where they want to go.
Yeah.
Because that's not the world of journalism that they're living in anymore, sadly.
Yeah. I think it's put forward a lot more nicely than it was with, say, Twig and Gus earlier on in their sort of, lamentations.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, Ricardo Hendricks, Slim Charles, and the remaining members of the co-op meet with Spiros, who appears to give them an identical speech to the one he gave Marlo when agreeing to supply him. The Greek himself takes his usual position at the bar, listening to the conversation incognito. Brilliant to see Slim in charge. So glad his character has stuck around for the full length, and it's a shame we didn't get to see more of his greatness, really. And also that I like the fact that he's brought his guys with him, emphasising the loyalty and the fact that they're in it as a team. The co-op certainly has sort of the potential to remain strong without any of these weak links, namely Marlo and Cheese. So I'm very hopeful for the future of this organisation, and I can't see under this leadership how it could really perhaps be exploited again, unless Michael decides to change things up a little bit.
Yeah, there's a potential troublemaker for them there. Things do look very good for the co-op. Slim maybe now feeling like he could take that CEO position, maybe a little bit more confident.
Yeah, he's perfect for it.
Largely because he probably doesn't want someone like Cheese to be getting into power. He wants to ensure that the co-op is about that kind of loyalty and is about working together, clues in the title. And unsurprisingly, the Greeks continuing to orchestrate things without any difficulty whatsoever, and likely will for many years to come.
Yeah. I think the Greeks is perhaps the flimsiest part of the equation in this situation, because obviously this is the second time they've had to change their buyer in the space of not a long time, I imagine. And these guys are so cautious that there perhaps would be a question mark about them changing up their shop or their location, or it seems that they're having to blindly accept these new buyers based on the politics of the street, and perhaps that's what they have to do. But you'd have imagined the Greeks' concerns following lots and lots of changes and more faces.
Yeah, they probably find it quite frustrating about the fact that those that they're dealing with keep ending up getting arrested or killed or moved around or whatever. But I think it's just part of the business for them, I would imagine.
Yeah.
I know that maybe we could say that it would make more sense for them to start changing up, but then again, maybe this is a part on the episode itself of not wanting to change things up too much at the end. They want to give us a certain familiarity, and that familiarity with the Greeks certainly comes with their little cafe.
Yeah. Okay. Mayor Thomas Carcetti becomes governor, but has compromised the promises he made to aid the city when he ran for mayor. So we just get the celebration.
Well, this is a surprise to absolutely nobody, of course.
Yeah.
Given the strength behind his campaign, I mean, I don't think there was ever too much doubt about whether or not he would achieve the role of governor. He's obviously done very well. He's got people like Steindorf behind him who know exactly what they're doing. So sure enough, he ends up in that position, but it doesn't feel like a very optimistic scenario given everything that's been sacrificed in order for him to get there. And any kind of respect that we might have had for Carcetti. I mean, we were really tricked by Carcetti's New Day all that time back. I mean, he's helped the careers of a whole bunch of people in the city who will do nothing to help Baltimore. And the people who have essentially been moved up thanks to the concessions that he's had to make are not going to be doing anything particularly positive for the city as a whole. And I think Carcetti ends the season and the whole show having perhaps fallen the furthest of any character in our estimations.
Yep. Yeah, I'd agree with that. Obviously, on a much bigger stage than when he won the mayoral position. To go with the position he's got now, and as you say, very different in terms of his intentions when they were still innocent and uncorrupted, and he was kind of fooling us. And yep, Jen makes a final appearance behind, apparently appearing very happy as well for the win. So.
Yeah, it does feel very, very different to that mayoral win, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The optimism in that episode is so palpable, and the
subtext is just so different.
Here. Yeah.
Okay. Similarly, Nerese Campbell becomes mayor and names Stan Valchek police commissioner. Typical.
Neither of those things are particularly good news.
Yeah. A real FU for the viewer here, particularly with Valchek. I guess now they've got a black mayor back in that seat, there's no worry over having a white commissioner, so more luck for Valchek on the racial front there. He's sort of chips have fallen just correctly for him.
Yeah, Valchek just keeps finding himself in positions where he gets largely what he wants, although he may not have got Frank Sobotka. He knows how to play the game, and he's found himself in position advantageous enough to make him commissioner, which is a shame because he is a rather nasty piece of work and is just going to be running the whole position based to keep the mayor happy and to keep things pretty much exactly as they are with the stats and whatnot, and make sure that he's powerful enough to influence all of these people. So don't expect any kind of progression whatsoever in the Baltimore Police Department whilst this guy is in charge.
Yeah. Okay, the most depressing of the bunch, Dookie and the Araba shoot heroin in a decrepit building. Yeah, that's it. So very much akin to Johnny and Bubbles and Sharod's scenes that have come before. And yeah, just sat around a campfire, and I guess it was inevitable based on the scene with Prez, but it's never nice to see it.
Yeah, it's strange because although it's very strongly hinted at and we see all the evidence of it, I wouldn't have been surprised if he would have never actually seen any moments of getting high from Dookie. But no, here it is. It still comes out as pretty shocking to see Dookie shooting up like this, and it's just terrible. You just can't believe what a waste it is, and why is he doing this? Why is he hanging out with these people? But that's the fate that's come about. He's just had no other options. He has tried quite hard to find himself an alternative, and sadly has blocked out a genuine alternative from his mind as being, legitimate for whatever reason. He's just too afraid of being made an outcast again, and has rejected it from his mind. So instead, he's convinced himself somehow through the needle that this is where he's going to be instead, and this is the start of many years of downfall towards addiction, and maybe hitting that bottom that we hear Waylon talking about, and maybe, just maybe, much further down the line, having a similar redemption to Bubbles. But sadly, we're not going to see it. All we're left with is the image of him sticking that needle in his arm.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, very much following in the footsteps of Bubbles. And next,
I mean, this is the kind of the shot that we're left with as the shot of the kids that we meet in season 4.
Yeah, it's very sobering. Definitely. Next up, we have Daniels becoming a defense attorney while Rhonda Perlman becomes a judge. So
these two have always deserved to be, moved up and gain some success. Sadly for Daniels, I guess it depends whether you call it moving down. I mean, if he ends up in a position that he's happy with, he has a law degree, it's clearly something that he's interested in. So I guess it's not really down or bad news. You can always do very, very well for yourself as a lawyer, but Perlman as a judge certainly makes perfect sense. Yeah. And that is a good piece of news.
Yeah, it's among the happiest of the endings here, and I love the tender look that they share with one another, as if sort of no one else knows they're in a relationship as they sort of go through this court proceeding.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's certainly one of the best pieces of news to see Perlman in the judge's garb, because she's very, very, very appropriate for that role.
Yep, definitely. Promoted behind some shady stuff, but nonetheless very deserving, as we said. Okay, so Chris Partlow and Weebay Bryce, both incarcerated for life with no possibility of parole, converse on friendly terms in prison. So these are the two biggest murderers of the show. They've got the highest body count between them. Obviously Chief Muscle for the Barksdale and Stanfields respectively. I think Chris does have the bigger murder count, but they're still both pretty hefty, and they both have no chance of parole, so they'll need to create a lifelong bond, I guess, in here. They sort of seem well-suited companions. And I really like this little snippet we get here.
Yeah, it's very brief, but it tells quite a strange story when you think about it. Of these two ultimate enforcers of their two respective drug institutions. One wonders what kind of conversations they must be having.
Yeah. What was your first kill like? The Game of Thrones convo.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's really good they brought back Weebay. He sort of managed to stick his face into all 5 seasons, despite only really being involved in the first one, which is quite nice. So that's good.
Well, if it weren't for what happened in season 1, he would have been a great character to keep including.
Yeah, it's true that. Okay, Bill Rules becomes superintendent of the Maryland State Police, as promised by Carcetti. I think this is the only scene where Carcetti is actually governor, is doing something as a governor. So
yeah, and Rules gets his, I don't know, he just kind of gets a new uniform and a big hat, and
Yeah.
off to keep sort of doing. I mean, he's obviously very competent at that kind of job, and he just goes on to new things, and he's got there thanks to his political manoeuvrings that he's always been slightly adept at. He always knows how to keep himself in the loop and how to make it seem like he's not really on anybody's side, whilst at the same time currying enough favours to secure advancement. So, I mean, it's difficult with Rules because he's not the same kind of, inherent political bad that one might see from, say, Steintorf. And when he's surrounded by characters like that, he himself seems somewhat less.
Yeah.
Leaves less of a bad taste in the mouth. But I suppose at the end of the day, he is still a pretty undesirable character and never really had massive issues with all of the stat games and whatnot's going on. He's just going to do whatever is best to keep his career on the move. Yeah,
it's overall a pretty negative sort of ending, I guess, isn't it? And yeah, I think it's good to mention that Rules has improved. It's good, particularly this episode where we saw him in a completely different power position to what he's used to, which really undercuts a lot of that initial. When we first met Rules, he was a little bit of a one-dimensional angry man in some ways, and he really has developed a lot over the show. Okay. The best of the bunch, Bubbles, finally accepted by his sister, is able to have dinner with his family.
As we've already said, this is the start of a much longer road for Bubbles, but it is just an incredible relief to see him finally out of that basement. I mean, he has literally climbed out of his past, out of the darkness from before. He's risen to a state where he has a bit of security, he has self-respect, he's sort of in the bright cleanliness of that kitchen and enjoying food with his family, and finally he can start genuinely rebuilding, and it's just the greatest success story of the entire show. It's just fantastic. You can't help but smile.
Yeah, definitely. Kennard is arrested under the watchful eye of Crutchfield, likely for the murder of Omar. So makes sense.
Kennard's still causing trouble.
Yeah, well, I mean, makes sense that he got arrested, as he did leave that gun at the scene, and the eyewitness said it was a little boy who shot him. I guess glad he's out of the street, but then you sort of consider that he's literally a tiny kid, so it's kind of sad too that he's involved in this juvenile system so early. But yeah, he's wearing a full-size Bubs Depot T-shirt as well. Full adult one.
Well, I mean, as long as that kid is prevented from doing anything to anyone or any cats and like that ever again, then it's for the better. It's interesting that they didn't go for a more resolutely bad ending for him, but I guess we can already see what's going on. I mean, it's like you say, it's hard to be totally angry at him because it's just he's obviously lived a life that has forced him to become that fierce in order to survive, and it is just a weird mix of kind of disgust and sadness facing Kennard.
Okay, so that's the sort of main course of the montage. We then have shots of the city's drug trade and wider community. Some shots are borrowed from season 1, including girls sitting on a stoop. They're watching Snot Boogie's murder scene. We also see Wallace and Poot as they leave the Greeks in season 1. We also get to see D'Angelo's hand playing chess, and also the Western boys drinking in their spot under the overpass. And they also parody Bodhi's stone throwing at the police camera.
That's right, yep.
So interesting that they reuse some season 1 footage. I guess they're trying to nail home the point that it's all cyclical. We deliberately aren't showing the faces of these rehashed characters. I guess we have to assume that the roles are the same, but that there's different faces in place. It's, the names have changed. So interesting. And then they sort of give us a little slideshow of the locations across the city. We see the docks. They get a little bit of the original detailed dungeon under the city hall. The low rises completely unchanged, really. Still with a sort of drug dealer sat on the sofa. We then see BD's patrol car around the Maryland docks. We don't know if BD's still in there. We then see the Marine unit on patrol around the docks, the Domino Sugars factory, the Museum of Industry. Big sort of swathe of the city there shown to us. Guess not.
So yeah, we just reintroduced a whole bunch of places that are familiar to us. Some that are not, but could be if there were to be some further series, and we get that cyclical nature. Like you say, there's a lot of emphasis on season 1 locations and similar characters and a reuse of material just to emphasize that the city goes on despite everything that we've seen. The city continues.
Yeah.
And this is the point, another point that it's making, that we have a sort of true main character, such as it is, which is the city itself.
Yeah.
And it's nice to see all of these old haunts and familiar locations and places that signify particular seasons.
Yeah, it's good for a nostalgic benefit, definitely, and as you say, it does make the show feel very complete once they sort of give us the full portrait of the city.
Yeah, I mean, it gives you a very conflicted feeling, because on the one hand, it's very heartwarming because of the familiarity, and you see all the people going about their thing, and you understand these people and their stories that little bit better than you did if you would have seen a montage like this right at the beginning of the show. It gives you an appreciation of what you've learned and what you've understood in the time that you've spent with it. But at the same time, you're also seeing all of the things that are wrong with the show, or wrong with the city even, and wrong with what we've seen in the show. And it's it's a very conflicted feeling to see that you're just seeing the same problems continue, and yet you understand the character that the city has, and it gives you a very rather odd, conflicted feeling about the whole thing.
Yeah. And then we reach our final strand of the what's it called? The montage, and it's the strand that the montage is actually framed around. So it's Jimmy McNulty, meanwhile, taking the time to locate the vagrant he displaced in episode 6 while inventing the Red Ribbon Killer, and he drives him back home. He assumes to Baltimore. It is revealed that McNulty is now ex-police. The final shot is of the Baltimore skyline, with cars driving past on the highway in the foreground.
Yeah, I mean, it's... Maybe it was a little bit too neat to have McNulty going and getting Larry and bringing him back. I mean, I know he's a very good investigator and everything, but if the guy walked out of that place and went goodness knows where, it would have been a hell of a task to find this Larry guy, presumably.
Yeah.
Or maybe not, I don't know, but I kind of had it in my head that it would have been quite difficult for him to find him. So it feels maybe a little too neat for McNulty to get that redemption, to kind of pay off that one debt, as it were.
Yeah.
But, I don't know, I can't hold it too harshly against it, but it did feel like an unnecessary completeness. Maybe it would have been a bit more realistic to have McNulty have to accept that what he had done there was unrecoverable. And, of course, we get that the final shot of the city that we've spent all this time with. And despite all that's happened, we can't help but think of it quite fondly. And so we do get an awful lot of closure to some extent on quite a few characters that we see, but not for the city itself. The city gets very little closure. It's just a sort of these things continue. The next wave continues. Is there actually any hope for a city like this? Is anyone actually going to be capable of recognizing these problems? And rather than expecting one person like a mayor to do it, are we capable of doing it collectively? Are the people of Baltimore capable of doing that? That's what this show is trying to raise as questions. And certainly not suggesting that we have the answers, but one can't help but think of that sort of thing as we ponder on the skyline one last time.
Yeah, I do think it's interesting your point about it being a bit of a fluke that he finds him. It'd be interesting if they did decide to go with a sort of a montage of him searching and then obviously giving up and driving back to Baltimore alone. Considering that's the way they play it, that he does find him, we then don't know how far his care of Larry is going to go. Perhaps him and Beatty will take him into their house. That seems a bit extreme. Or maybe they'll just drop him off at another homeless shelter. We don't know quite how far his redemption is intended to be here for what he did to Larry. And McNulty's end here, I guess, is ambiguous, but as we've said before, positive leaning. I've noticed that on the widescreen version you can see the far right of the screen, and he doesn't take the exit for Russell Street. Don't know if there's any metaphor there, but he drives right past the Russell Street exit. So probably means nothing, but I thought that'd be an interesting little tidbit if it was intended. And then, of course, the final skyline shot, of which we've had many, particularly this episode, but throughout the seasons, reminding us that the city is what we've been shown, and that's the show is ultimately about that. I think even though we've only gotten to know perhaps 200 to 300 or so of its citizens in varying degrees, I think that's sort of how many characters there are. They all represent a broad cross-section of Baltimore, and it's so complete by the end that you don't feel like there's sort of a stone left unturned. You really feel like you know this city.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
So that final shot is sort of perfectly familiar for us. We feel like we know it inside out.
And somehow becomes all-encompassing.
Yeah.
Because of that incredible amount of completeness that we've got from this show that we're not used to from other TV shows when it comes to representing particular cities. That it does feel all-encompassing, even though it does, show just a couple of high rises in one particular part of the city centre. It just feels like you're looking at a summation of the city, and well, that was it. That was what we were here for. That's the end.
Yeah. And it's the ending is perhaps not as crushingly depressing as a lot of the other shows' endings would have had us believe or fear, but it does have its tragedies, and it's balanced with the bit of sentimentality that's needed for it to feel important, for it to feel like some sort of emotional response at the end. And I think it does it really well, and it's certainly a clean finish. It's not as clean as perhaps Breaking Bad's finish, which is way too much. But it's by no means The Sopranos, which I know had perhaps a more ambiguous, controversial finish that a lot of people would have liked. It just it finds a middle ground.
It's a healthy balance. I think you're right. It's a nice balance of certain things being closed off and tied up, and whilst at the same time having aspects of that being, maybe very unusual questions being raised. I mean, you look at the situation of McNulty. He manages to wrap up the difficulties that he may have made by kidnapping this Larry guy, so he brings him home. He kind of makes up for that in full, but at the same time, what happens to him now is what does he go on to?
Yeah.
How does his relationship with Beatty progress, if at all? These are questions that don't get answered. So it feels overall, using that as an example, like it's very balanced. I'm not surprised that there's a certain amount of sentimentality. I think that's reasonable, given the nature of the finale. We've spent so long with these characters, and there has been a lot of straight-faced looking at the facts that I think the show deserves a certain amount of indulgence into what it's been looking at, and that is the city of Baltimore. It does show us a lot of people on the street, and what we know of finales so far is that they give us these kind of montages where we're shown a general representation of what we've been looking at thus far. And when it comes to the finale, we just get that on an even greater scale. And given Season 5's commitment to providing something just that little bit larger than life, it makes sense that we get that from the finale as well, given that we're closing the show as a whole. So I think it's not like I don't think it's like the best episode of the show as a whole, but with its scope and its length and what it does as a finale, it's definitely up there, and I think it makes an excellent way of closing the show. It's pretty much among the only ways they could have done it, really.
Yeah, it does feel like a very perfect sort of, particularly the final scene as well, just that skyline. It's sort of the perfect ending, really.
Yeah, I mean, they've managed to hit the way of closing this show really, really spot on. So it's great that it does feel satisfying. I think that's one thing that people ask when they think of a finale, and when they approach it, they want to feel satisfied. And every time this does make me feel satisfied. I can't help but feel the tragedy that's going on, and there are questions being asked, but I think you get what you come for.
Yeah, and that's why we don't need a season 6, as much as it would be great in some ways. It's only bound to taint kind of what's come before it, particularly in the context of this really final ending episode.
I mean, even today you see people commenting on forums and on Reddit and the like about talking about the possibility of a season 6. I mean, obviously it's just never going to happen, and I don't think it should. The Wire is very much a product of when it came out, and we've had this finale that feels like it's the right way to finish. So yeah, it just wouldn't be appropriate to have an extra one clamped on the end of it.
Okay. Not to be anticlimactic, but should we do our 3 final sections?
Yeah, well, that's the last recap done. I mean,
Yeah.
that is we got to finish it somehow, I guess.
Yeah.
We maybe not be as masterful about our finales as the show itself
Yeah.
is. So all we can do is move on.
Look around you. The pond is shrinking. The fish are nervous. Get some profile, win a prize. Maybe find a bigger pond somewhere. Whiting, Clevenaw, Templeton. They snatch a Pulitzer or two and they are up and gone from this place. For them, that's what this is all about. Me, I'm too fucking simple-minded for that. I just wanted to see something new every day. Write a story with it.
Okay, so the title, Dash 30 Dash, which in journalism speak is the sort of shorthand for the end of a story. So pretty obvious meaning for the title, considering the theme of the season is journalism and whatever. And I mean, yeah, that's it really. It's a nice...
Yeah, there's not too much to say about it, although it is kind of striking to have it as the name of the episode. I mean, we're used to, at the very least, some letters.
Yeah, I mean, it's perhaps a bit of a stretch, but if I was trying to find another sort of meaning in the context of the wider show, I like how the numeric title kind of suggests the cyclical nature of the game. So this is iteration X in a long line of generations. Not necessarily the 30th, but, you know, it's the idea that it's just kind of another stage in this of generations messing up their institutions, basically.
It does feel like there's a certain representation of 30 years as well, because when David Simon is doing Homicide, for example, he's looking very much at the Baltimore of the 80s, and a lot of what goes on in season 1 is based around the incidences from that. So we've kind of gone from the 80s up until 2008, which is sort of heralding this new decade. So it's almost like there's 30 years being presented by the show to some extent.
Yeah, in a small little sort of, is it 8 years? No, 6 years actually, isn't it, in terms of the show's chronology? But it definitely does take some license in terms of technology, particularly, I think. Yeah,
so I guess there's a very kind of minor connection there as well.
The fashion as well. If you look at the fashion of particularly the gangsters in season 1, it really does. It's a stark contrast to season 5, which looks very contemporary, even by today's standards. I don't know if that's genuinely a big fashion shift at point during the noughties, or whether that is trying to sort of represent going back to the 80s as well. Yeah.
And we have them, like, you know, in the police department using typewriters and the like in season 1. So
it may well be all part of it, yeah. And then we have The Life of Kings ... H.L. Mencken, who was a revered Baltimore Sun journalist. I think I should have done my research, but I think we're going back to the 50s H.L. Mencken's era. And
yeah, this epigraph is obviously part of a larger quote that we see on the wall behind Gus at the Baltimore Sun, reading, as I look back over a misspent life, I find myself more and more convinced that I had more fun doing news reporting than in any other enterprise. It really is the life of kings. So it's like a sort of message to journalism itself about how it shouldn't forget its roots and what is truly rewarding about it.
Yeah.
And that it's not just a sort of vehicle for oneself. It is also a truly valuable pursuit. And as Gus says about wanting to, you know, wake up in the morning and report on something new every day, there is a very important, almost spiritual element to it.
Yeah. And then obviously that's very directly referring to journalism, but I like how it's very sort of open quote and can clearly refer to the chess analogy of the show and the fact that of the hierarchy, and those at the top are the only ones that really have any semblance of power. And even then, they're normally accountable to someone above them. There's always the case of that being present, and so it's very, in a very general sense, really sums up the show.
It's something that almost all the characters are striving for or thinking about or acting upon, is this potential life of a king, a life of one of these people at the very top of the chain. and everyone's scrabbling their way to get up there.
Yeah.
Well, we also learn that if you do get to the very top of the chain, obviously there are many benefits to be had, particularly financially, but maybe a lot of the glamour that we perceive with it, some of it is perhaps a little exaggerated, and a lot of the problems that one gets with it are certainly underplayed.
Definitely. And just to knock off our cameos for this episode, we had Miss Donnelly, we had Prez, we had Shardine, we had Weebay, who hasn't appeared since season 4, and David Simon as well, making his sort of finale appearance. So
Yeah, it seems fair enough that he would appear in the last one. We expected him to have perhaps at least one more cameo.
yeah. So there we have it. That's everything. That's The Wire done and dusted.
I don't think we can be any more complete than that. I think that's we've sort of exhausted all of our notes and everything, and just looking at the run time on here, we're going to be getting very close to breaching that 4-hour mark. So
I think
it feels very fitting for an episode half an hour longer than usual.
Yeah, I think Matt can complete quite a few DIY projects in the time it will take to listen to this episode. So,
yeah.
Cheers for sticking with us, guys. If you are, I appreciate that 4 hours ago you turned this podcast on. It's sort of flown by for us. It sort of feels like an hour each time we do it, doesn't it? So
yes, you get into it, and then at some point you reach the end. That's about it, really.
Yeah.
So I suppose, as I mentioned right at the beginning of the episode, we were going to maybe talk just a tiny little bit more about, the podcast itself. Now that we have come to the end, I mean, Toby and I, this podcast comes from many conversations that we had when we used to live together. In fact, both being big fans of the show and both being big fans of podcasts about TV shows, and we both recognised that there wasn't really one for The Wire. I mean, we couldn't find one that was an episode-by-episode analysis in the form of the sort of podcasts we were listening to at the time for things like Game of Thrones and Breaking Bad, and we kind of didn't really know why that was. And after a bit of deliberation and numbing and ahhing, we decided that, I think it was sort of once we had both moved out, once we had both sorted ourselves out in our new sort of places of residence, we would get started. We were going to commit ourselves to 60 episodes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And we completed it. I never thought that we might see the day. But, it's been a lot of fun. It's been a lot of work. I've got to say that Alex has certainly taken the lion's share of it, despite all my complaints about working. He's because you've obviously produced all the episodes, uploaded all of them. I think responded to every single one of our emails. And obviously written all the synopses and the rest of it, so that's a serious amount of additional work beyond it, so it's got to be given to you, sir.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, there is a lot of behind the scenes stuff for the podcast, and getting it all out there and distributed. You got to, like you say, write all these synopses and sort out getting it put on YouTube and tagging things, and there's the blog, and obviously I put together the website and did all the imagery for that, and there's editing the podcast itself, and just uploading it takes quite a while because it's got to be available for download and on YouTube, and it's got to be on the iTunes stream, and there was getting that sorted out, so there was a lot of extra work in it. But we both maintained from the outset that it was always a free project. It wasn't we weren't going to sort of make any money or get any sponsorships or anything like that. I mean, we were never really under the impression that it would gain much of an audience. We recognised that it was very much a niche thing.
Yeah.
So we weren't really under the assumption that it would make us any money through recognition or attention or anything. So it was just a labour of love. That's what it always was from the start, and that's what it's been right up to the very end.
Yeah, hopefully it's not been too in depth for you guys. It's certainly the sort of depth that we're looking for in our analysis. Getting every scene under the microscope really, and seeing what's going on, finding all there is to find in the show. Really, that's our goal. And as you say, I mean that's kind of why there's no real plan for future episodes. We're not full-time podcasters. We're not even part-time podcasters, really. It's just a side project. We
just decided to do this one day.
It's a side project for us. So as much as we're going to miss it, there's been a lot of work put into it, and I'm hoping that we may be able to come back every so often to do something here or there related to it. It's still the best show, and probably always will be for me. So
Yeah, and like you say, we're not podcasts. I mean, before this, we had never done anything like this before. It was just something that we decided to do out on a limb. And I do say this, having now done a project like this, that if you are thinking of taking up a podcast or any kind of major project that you're not too sure about because you've never done anything like it before, I mean, just go for it. That's what we did. We just decided to start something that we saw in our eyes as, that was something that other people did. Other people with that kind of experience did that, but we decided to give it a go, and we had a lot of fun doing it. And I guess it's something that we can look back on and be very proud of. And like you say, because we've tried to be as complete as possible. We have really, really delved in, and if nothing else, I think we'd both just like to think that we've created something that if you like The Wire and you want to get that kind of information and you want to listen to it in podcast format, that this is the podcast to listen to. This is, it's now available to anyone, anywhere in the world, totally for free. It's going to be staying on YouTube. It's going to be staying available on the website. I mean, it's not going anywhere. It's now available for anyone to listen to. So we kind of wanted to create a definitive document on The Wire, as it were. Yeah,
and hopefully it will accompany many rewatches into the future. That's all we can ask for, really, isn't it? Yeah, and I guess it goes. We really have to say that the only reason I think the principal reason why we really kept at it and we really tried to make the quality as good as possible is because we started getting emails and we started getting people in contact, and then there was comments on the YouTube videos, and then there was comments on the blog, and then we were getting messages on Twitter if I was posting about the episodes going up on there, and it just started getting bigger and bigger, and the number of downloads got bigger and bigger. So anyone, if you ever listened to the show, if you ever emailed the show, if you had any kind of interaction with us whatsoever, or you commented on a video or whatever, we really do have to offer you a massive thank you. It really has been incredible, the response that we've had to this show. We've never really expected anyone to get in major contact with us. We certainly never expected the massive emails and comments that we got of people contributing their opinions to the show, and allowed us to start off episodes with our listeners' corner, and dedicating a section to it was something we never planned. And we never planned having those great kind of discussions around it. So it's been an absolute pleasure to have people get involved. So if you did get in touch, just thank you very much. It really, really does mean a hell of a lot to us. Yeah. Cheers so much, guys. Yeah, absolutely. All right. So anything else? Any more closing statements you want to make before we really do have to sign off eventually? Yeah, I'm just seeing that clock tick. It's like I've never seen a podcast on iTunes that's like 4 hours. This is seriously breaking the boundaries. But I guess it really did warrant that level of discussion, particularly with that montage where you just have so many scenes come at you at once with so many possible futures to discuss. It really does sort of warrant the real deep analysis. But yeah, it's been great. Really enjoyed it. So cheers, Alex. Cheers, the viewers and listeners and commenters. Hopefully watch this space and we'll be back with something soon. You never know. Yeah, we might have a bonus episode coming sometime soon, depending on what kind of reaction that we get. So just leaves me to say that if you do still want to get in contact, the email is still there, caughtonthewire@gmail.com. We'll still have the website, so if we do anything bonus, that'll go up there as well, caughtonthewire.wordpress.com. Any bonus episodes, you'll hear about it there. But from us, in terms of episode analysis, that really is it. And whether you've joined us from the beginning, from the middle, if this is the first time you've heard us, if you've got in contact with the show, or if you've never got in contact but you just listen to it regularly, all we have to say is thank you very much for joining us. We've been Caught on the Wire, and we hope to speak to you again in the future on a similar topic or otherwise. Thank you very much. Cheers, guys. Bye-bye.
If you walk through the garden, you better watch your back. Well, I beg your pardon, walk a straight and narrow track. Jesus, He'll save your soul. You gotta keep the devil down in the hole. All the angels sing about Jesus' mighty soul, and they shield you with their wings, keep you close to the Lord. Don't pay heed to temptation, or His hands are so cold. You gotta keep the devil